My stepmother just texted me to stay away from tomorrow's family vote, thinking I am still the helpless girl she pushed to the sidelines. She has no idea I am watching her hotel right now from my own penthouse balcony above. While she plots to sell our legacy for $30 million, she forgets one thing. My grandfather did not just invite me to watch. He gave me the only vote that actually counts. My name is Serenity Taylor, and I am 32 years old. I was standing in the center of my living room, suspended in the sky above River North, Chicago, when the phone in my hand vibrated with the weight of a sentence I had expected my entire life. The glass walls around me were cold against the winter draft, but the chill that ran down my spine had nothing to do with the weather. I looked down at the screen. The name displayed was Valerie, my stepmother. The message was brief. It was polite. It was devastatingly final. Family meeting for the vote tomorrow. Just Brandon and his family this time. You do not need to come. I stared at the words. You do not need to come. It was not a question. It was not a request. It was an instruction, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who has spent 2 decades drawing a circle around a family and ensuring I stood just outside the chalk line. I felt that familiar numbness start in my fingertips. A ghost sensation from when I was 10 years old, or 12, or 16, waiting by the door for an invitation that never arrived. It was the feeling of being the extra piece in a puzzle that was already complete. They were gathering to decide the fate of Kingsley Care Group, the company my grandfather built with his bare hands, and to them, my presence was as unnecessary as a winter coat in July. But this time, the numbness did not last. It was replaced almost instantly by a heat that rose from my chest to my throat. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below me, the city of Chicago was a sprawling grid of amber and white lights, breathing and moving in the darkness. Directly beneath my line of sight, about 4 blocks away, stood the darker, rigid shape of the Drake Hotel. That was where they were. That was where my father, Mark, was likely pouring a drink to calm his nerves. That was where Valerie was likely fixing Brandon's tie, telling him he was the future, the golden boy who would inherit the kingdom. That was where they were plotting to sell my grandfather's legacy for $30 million. I typed a reply. I did not argue. I did not beg. I did not ask why. I typed a single word. Perfect. I pressed send. They have no idea. That is the beauty of it. That is the secret that keeps me warm in this massive, empty penthouse. To Valerie and my father, I am just Serenity, the quiet daughter who moved away, the one who dabbles in computers, the one they call independent, so they do not have to feel guilty about neglecting me. They think I live in a rented apartment somewhere in the suburbs. They think I'm getting by. They do not know that the glass floor I'm standing on belongs to me. They do not know that 3 years ago, I founded a medical logistics startup called PulseBridge. They do not know that when the supply chains broke down and hospitals were screaming for equipment, my software fixed the lines. They do not know that I sold PulseBridge to a global conglomerate for $120 million. I own this penthouse. I own the building next to it. And more importantly, through a maze of shell companies and anonymous trusts, I am currently the 3rd largest shareholder of the very company they are trying to sell. I am the ghost in their machine. I walked to the edge of the glass, pressing my forehead against the pane. From up here, the cars looked like blood cells moving through arteries. The distance gave me clarity. For years, I thought my exclusion was a punishment. I thought I was not good enough, not smart enough, not Kingsley enough. Tonight, looking down at the hotel where they were excluding me from the table yet again, I realized it was not a punishment. It was a mistake. Their mistake. The Kingsley Care vote was scheduled for 10 in the morning tomorrow. The deal was simple on paper. An investment fund wanted to buy the nursing home chain, strip it for assets, and turn a quick profit. The price tag was $30 million. My grandfather, Walter Kingsley, was against it. He wanted to preserve the care quality, the dignity of the residents. But Grandpa is 80 years old. His health is failing. My father is weak, easily swayed by the promise of quick liquidity. Valerie sees the sale as her retirement fund, and Brandon's ticket to a life of leisure without the hassle of actually running a business. Brandon, my half-brother, the boy who could do no wrong, was the tiebreaker, or so they thought. They believed the board was locked. They believed the family shares were unified under my father's control. They believed I was just the stepdaughter who would cause a scene if she knew the truth. My phone pinged again. This time, it was not a text. It was an email notification. I saw the sender's name, and my pulse spiked. It was Arthur Penhaligon, my grandfather's personal attorney. I unlocked the phone and opened the document attached to the email. It was heavy with legal jargon, dense paragraphs about fiduciary duties and irrevocable trusts. I scanned down to the bottom, past the clauses and the conditions, until I found the section that mattered. Pursuant to the urgency of the upcoming shareholder meeting and the decline in Mr. Walter Kingsley's health, the special voting proxy attached to his founder's shares has been transferred effective immediately to the Taylor Trust. I scrolled further. Primary beneficiary and sole trustee of the Taylor Trust, Serenity Taylor. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. The silence in the penthouse seemed to deepen, becoming almost reverent. Grandpa Walter had done it, while Valerie was busy curating the guest list for her victory dinner, while Brandon was busy trying on suits. My grandfather had quietly moved the most powerful piece on the board to the one person no one was watching. The Taylor Trust. He used my mother's maiden name. I looked back down at the hotel. I imagined them in the suite. Valerie was probably ordering champagne. Brandon was probably practicing his handshake. They were celebrating a victory that had already been snatched from their hands, and they would not know until they walked into that boardroom tomorrow morning. I turned away from the window and walked to the kitchen island. It was a slab of black marble, cold and sleek. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, from adrenaline. I have a question for you. If you were me, what would you do? If you had spent 32 years being told you were secondary, being told to sit in the other room, being told that the real business was for the real family, how would you react? Would you take the power you just stepped into and use it to crush them silently? Would you sign the papers, take your share of the $30 million, and disappear to an island, leaving them to wonder how you got so rich? That would be the easy way. That would be the safe way. But revenge is not about safety. Revenge is about correction. It is about rebalancing the scales that have been tipped against you since you were a child in snow boots, standing on a porch in Ohio. I looked at the empty expanse of my living room. It was beautiful, but it was lonely. I had built this fortress to keep the world out, to prove I did not need anyone, but looking at that email, looking at the trust my grandfather placed in me, I realized that proving I did not need them was not enough. I needed to show them that they needed me. And more importantly, I needed to show them who they had left behind. I am not going to crash their dinner. I am not going to walk into the hotel lobby and scream. That is what the old Serenity would have done. The new Serenity, the one who built a logistics empire from a laptop in a dorm room, knows better. If you want to win a war, you do not charge the enemy line. You change the terrain. Perfect, I whispered to the empty room, repeating the word I had sent to Valerie. If they will not give me a seat at their table, I will not beg for a folding chair. I will build my own table. A better table. A table where the legs are not sawed off to make anyone feel small. I picked up my phone again. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled past my father. I scrolled past Valerie. I scrolled past Brandon. I went deeper, to the names that had gathered dust in my phone. The names of the people who, like me, had slowly drifted out of the Kingsley orbit because they did not shine bright enough for Valerie's taste. I stopped at Aunt Rachel, my father's younger sister. She used to send me birthday cards with $5 in them, even when I knew she was struggling to pay her own rent. She stopped coming to holidays 3 years ago when Valerie made a comment about her second husband's job. I tapped the call button. It rang 4 times. Serenity? Her voice sounded tired, surprised. Is everything okay? It is late. Hi, Aunt Rachel, I said, my voice steady. I know this is last minute, but are you busy tonight? Tonight? No, I am just watching television. Why? I am hosting a dinner, I said. A family dinner, but not the kind you are used to. I want you to come, and bring the cousins. There was a pause. Did Valerie put you up to this? Because if she did… Valerie does not know, I cut in. Valerie is not invited. This is my dinner, at my place, in the city. Your place? She sounded confused. Honey, I thought you were in that little studio in the Loop. I moved, I said. I will send a car for you. Please come. There is someone else I'm calling, and I think he would really like to see you. I heard the hesitation, the fear of breaking the family lines, but then I heard the curiosity. Okay, Serenity, send the address. I hung up and kept scrolling. Uncle Andrew, Cousin Sarah, the people who were told they were too loud, too poor, too messy for the Kingsley brand. I called them all, and then, with my heart hammering against my ribs, I dialed the final number. The phone rang for a long time. I was about to hang up, thinking he had already gone to sleep, when the line clicked open. Hello? The voice was raspy, weak, but distinct. Grandpa, I said. Serenity? Walter Kingsley's voice cracked. Is something wrong? Did Mark call you? No, Grandpa. Mark did not call. Valerie texted me. She told me not to come to the hotel tonight. A heavy sigh came through the speaker. It sounded like air escaping a deflated tire. I am sorry, sweetheart. She manages the schedule now. I told her I wanted you there. It is okay, Grandpa, I said. And for the first time in years, I meant it. Actually, it is better than okay. I do not want to go to the hotel. I want you to leave the hotel. Leave? Serenity, I am in a wheelchair. I can barely get down the hall. I will send a transport, a medical transport, proper care. I want you to come to dinner, at my home. Your home? He sounded confused, just like Rachel. But the meeting is tomorrow, the vote. The vote is tomorrow. I agreed. But tonight is for family, the real family, the ones she did not invite. I have the proxy. Grandpa, I received the email from Arthur. Silence, absolute silence on the line. Then, a small, dry chuckle that turned into a cough. You got it, he whispered. I was not sure Arthur would get the paperwork through in time. He did, I said. So, will you come? Will you sit with me one last time before the wolves come to the door? Send the car, he said. Get me out of here. This room smells like lilies and lies. I hung up the phone. I stood there for a moment, letting the reality sink in. I was about to assemble the most ragtag, disregarded group of people my family had to offer, right here in the sky. I walked back to the balcony doors and slid them open. The wind hit me instantly, sharp and biting, smelling of snow and exhaust fumes. I stepped out onto the terrace. It wrapped around the corner of the building, offering a 270-degree view of the skyline. It was freezing, but I did not feel the cold. I walked to the railing and looked down at the Drake Hotel one last time. I could imagine Valerie holding court, sipping her wine, confident that she had pruned the family tree to her liking. She thought she had cut off the dead branches. She did not realize she had just severed the trunk. The city lights reflected in my eyes. I was 32 years old. I was a millionaire 100 times over. I held the future of Kingsley Care in my hand. And tomorrow, I was going to walk into that room and drop a bomb that would shatter their carefully constructed reality. But tonight was not about war. Tonight was about gathering the wounded. If they do not give me a seat, I said aloud, my voice snatched away by the wind, speaking to the millions of lights below and the invisible audience watching my life unfold. I will build my own balcony, and I will decide who gets to step out here with me. I turned my back on the hotel, on the past, and walked back inside. I had a dinner to prepare. I had a stage to set. The pieces were moving, and for the first time in the history of the Kingsley family, the king was coming to the pawn's house, and the queen had no idea she had already lost. To understand why I built a fortress in the sky, you have to understand the basement in Brookridge, Ohio. You have to understand the specific, bone-deep cold of the Midwest when you are standing in a room full of people who wish you were not there. My childhood was defined by snow. It piled up against the siding of our two-story colonial house, burying the dormant rose bushes my mother had planted before she died. I was 8 years old when she passed, and for a while, the house felt like a bruised lung, tender and quiet, but grief, in my father's house, was a temporary inconvenience. It was cleared away like the ice on the driveway to make room for something new. 2 years later, Mark Kingsley brought Valerie home. Valerie was beautiful in a sharp, geometric way. She had hair that never moved in the wind, and a smile that she could turn on and off like a light switch. She brought with her a son, Brandon, who was a year younger than me. Brandon was soft, loud, and demanded attention simply by existing. From the moment they stepped across the threshold, the air in the house changed. It became thinner. Valerie was a master of public performance. At church, at the grocery store, or when neighbors stopped by to admire the renovation she immediately commissioned. She was the doting stepmother. She would rest a manicured hand on my shoulder and squeeze just a little too hard, telling Mrs. Gable from next door how challenging it was to raise a girl who was so introverted. But the moment the front door closed and the deadbolt clicked, the warmth evaporated. Her eyes would slide over me as if I were a piece of furniture she had not chosen and could not figure out how to return. Brandon was the sun, I was the shadow. He was introduced to everyone as the future, even at 10 years old. He was the Kingsley heir. My father would ruffle his hair and call him the golden boy. When people asked about me, Valerie would offer a tight, polite smile and say that Serenity was the half-sister. She is very independent. Valerie would say, she does not need much. That word became my label, independent. It sounded like a compliment, but in the language of my stepmother, it was a dismissal. It meant I did not require care. It meant I did not require love. It meant I could be left alone. Christmas was the season where this architecture of exclusion was most visible. In the weeks leading up to the 25th of December, the living room would fill with boxes wrapped in gold and silver foil. They spilled out from under the spruce tree, creeping across the rug like a rising tide. I remember sitting on the stairs, counting them. The ratio was always 5-1, 10-1. One particular Christmas stands out. I was 11. Brandon tore through boxes containing the latest gaming console, a mountain bike that had to be wheeled in from the garage, and limited edition sneakers. Paper flew everywhere, creating a chaotic sea of wealth. My father sat in his armchair, sipping eggnog, beaming at the spectacle of his son's joy. When the storm subsided, Valerie reached behind the tree and pulled out a small, flat box wrapped in plain red paper. "For Serenity," she said. I opened it. Inside was a gray wool scarf. It was scratchy. It was dull. It was something you bought at a pharmacy on the way to a party you forgot about. "It is practical," Valerie said, taking a sip of her coffee. "You walk to the bus stop, so you need to stay warm." I looked at Brandon, who was already setting up his game system on the big television. I looked at my father, waiting for him to see the disparity, waiting for him to realize that his daughter was holding a piece of rough wool while his stepson held the world. But he just nodded. "Good idea. Val," he said, "keep her healthy." That was the year I stopped writing lists for Santa. I stopped hoping for the bicycle or the chemistry set. I realized that hope was a vulnerability Valerie could exploit, so I shut it down. I put on the scarf. I said thank you. I learned that if I wanted warmth, I would have to weave it myself. The isolation deepened as I turned 12. New Year's Eve in Brookridge was a community event. The town gathered in the small square by the courthouse for fireworks and hot cocoa. It was the one night of the year when the sky exploded with color, and for a few minutes, the gray town looked magical. At 6 p.m, I came downstairs dressed in my coat, ready to go. Valerie was by the door, adjusting Mark's tie. Brandon was already in the back seat of the car, honking the horn impatiently. Valerie turned to me, her face a mask of feigned surprise. "Oh, Serenity," she said, "we cannot all fit. The back seat is full of the folding chairs and the cooler for the party afterward. I looked at the car. It was a large SUV. There was plenty of room. Besides, she continued, checking her reflection in the hall mirror, the dog has been anxious lately with all the noise. We need someone to stay here and make sure Buster does not get scared. You are so good with him. I looked at my father. He was checking his watch. We are running late, Mark said. He did not even look at me. He just wanted to go. He wanted the peace of giving Valerie what she wanted. Stay with the dog. Serenity, he said. We will bring you back some cocoa. They left. I stood in the hallway, listening to the engine fade into the distance. I was 12 years old, and I had been demoted to the status of a utility. I was less important than a folding chair. I was a tool to keep the dog calm. I went into the living room and sat on the floor with Buster, the old golden retriever. When the clock struck midnight, I heard the distant pops of the fireworks. I could not see them. I just heard the dull thuds against the windows, like the house was being pelted with stones. As I grew into my teenage years, the bias became a sophisticated system. It was no longer just about gifts. It was about the currency of conversation. Valerie began to groom Brandon for the boardroom before he could even drive. At dinner, she would speak to him about stocks, about the Kingsley Care expansion, about leadership. She used a serious, respectful tone with him. When she turned to me, the register of her voice changed. It became instructional. It became a list of prohibitions. Serenity. Do not chew so loudly. Serenity. Make sure you cleared the driveway properly. Serenity. Your father is tired. Do not bother him with your questions. She was training my father, day by day, to see us differently. It was a slow erosion of his perspective. When relatives came to visit, Mark would puff out his chest and talk about Brandon's basketball statistics. He would detail every point scored, every rebound. Brandon was average at best, a bench warmer who played when the team was ahead by 20 points. But in Mark's retelling, he was the star. Meanwhile, I was ushered into the kitchen. Valerie would hand me a tray of appetizers or a towel to dry the dishes. Serenity is so helpful, she would say to the aunts and cousins. She loves being domestic. I hated it. I hated every grease-stained plate and every crystal glass. But I stayed silent because silence was the only way to survive without being called difficult. The sharpest knife, the one that cut the deepest, came when I was 16. I had entered the state science fair. While other kids were making baking soda volcanoes, I had spent 6 months coding a rudimentary program to optimize supply delivery for local pharmacies. It was the infant version of what would later become PulseBridge. I won first place. I beat seniors from private academies in Columbus and Cleveland. I brought home a large blue ribbon and a certificate embossed with gold foil. I placed them on the kitchen counter before dinner, right next to the salt and pepper shakers, where they could not be missed. We sat down to eat. Roast chicken and steamed vegetables. The steam rose up, clouding the space between us. I waited. I ate my potatoes and waited for someone to notice the bright blue ribbon screaming for attention 3 feet away. Valerie cleared her throat. Brandon had a game today, she announced, beaming. He scored a 3-pointer, Mark said, slamming his hand on the table in delight. A clean shot from the corner. You should have seen it. It was in the last quarter, Brandon said, grinning with a mouthful of chicken. The crowd went crazy. That is my boy, Mark said. That is the killer instinct you need in business. You see the opening, you take the shot. That is the Kingsley way. They talked about that single basket for 20 minutes. They analyzed the arc of the ball. They discussed the coach's reaction. Finally, during a lull, I spoke up. My voice sounded rusty. I won the state science fair today, I said. Valerie looked at me. Her eyes flicked to the ribbon on the counter and then back to her plate. That is nice. Serenity, she said. Pass the gravy, please. Mark looked up, blinking as if waking from a dream. Good job. Honey, did you hear what the coach said to Brandon after the game? Val? He said he has natural leadership. That was it. 7 months of work, a state title. a breakthrough in logistics logic, dismissed with a request for gravy. That night, I realized the truth. In the house of Mark and Valerie, value was not intrinsic. Value was performance. Value was what could be displayed to the neighbors, what could be bragged about at the country club. Brandon's sports were loud and visible. My coding, my logic, my grades, they happened in the dark. They happened in silence. Therefore, they had no price tag. I stopped trying to compete for their attention. I retreated. I found the door to the basement. The basement was unfinished. It smelled of damp concrete and dust. It was filled with the things Valerie deemed too ugly for the upstairs world: old holiday decorations, broken furniture, and my grandfather's old workbench. That workbench became my altar. It was covered in Walter Kingsley's discarded tools: screwdrivers with chipped handles, wire strippers, soldering irons, and boxes of capacitors and resistors. I started spending my evenings down there. The air was cold, always 10 degrees lower than the rest of the house, but I liked the cold. It kept me awake. I taught myself how to fix things. I found an old radio that had not worked in a decade. I took it apart. I learned to read the circuit board like a map. I learned that red wires carried power and black wires carried ground. I learned that if a connection was broken, the music stopped. It was simple. It was fair. Machines did not care if you were the stepdaughter. They did not care if you were pretty or popular. If you did the work, if you soldered the joint correctly, the machine worked. It was a logic that the upstairs world lacked. One evening in late January, the furnace began to rattle. It was a beast of a machine located in the corner of the basement. I was down there, reading a textbook on distribution networks, when I heard footsteps on the floorboards above me. The basement ceiling was uninsulated, just bare joists and subflooring. I could hear everything. Valerie was on the phone. Her heels clicked sharply on the hardwood of the kitchen. "I know," she was saying. "I know. Cindy, but what can I do? Mark feels guilty if we send her to boarding school." I froze. I sat perfectly still on the concrete floor, clutching my book. "She is just distinct." Valerie continued. Her voice was low, carrying that conspiratorial tone she used with her friends. "She lurks. Honestly, she does not fit the Kingsley name. She is too sour, too serious." There was a pause while the person on the other end spoke. "Oh, do not worry about the inheritance." Valerie laughed. It was a cold, brittle sound. "Brandon is the only one with the aptitude for it. Serenity will go away eventually. She is the type who leaves. She knows she does not belong here." I sat there for a long time after her footsteps faded away. The furnace rattled and groaned, fighting to push heat up to the people who despised me. She does not fit the Kingsley name. It hurt. It felt like a physical blow to the stomach, but as the pain subsided, it left something else behind: clarity. She was right. I did not fit. I was not a decorative object to be placed on a shelf. I was not a loud, golden thing to be paraded around. I was the mechanic in the basement. I was the one who understood how the wires connected. I was the one who knew that if you cut the power in the dark, the lights upstairs would go out. Valerie's cruelty was a prophecy. I would go away. I would leave. But she was wrong about one thing. I would not leave because I was weak. I would leave to build something strong enough to come back. The final memory of that house, the one I carry with me like a stone in my pocket, happened 2 years before I left for college. It was another New Year's Eve. They had gone to a party at the country club this time. I was home alone, again. The heat was broken in my bedroom. So I sat in the living room, wrapped in the scratchy gray scarf Valerie had given me years ago. I watched the ball drop in Times Square on the old television. I watched the happy couples kissing, the confetti raining down on millions of people who felt like they belonged to something. I looked at the window. The frost had created a fern-like pattern on the glass, obscuring the outside world. I could see my own reflection in the dark pane, a pale, skinny girl with dark eyes and a mouth set in a grim line. "No more," I whispered to the glass. I made a vow to the empty room. I promised myself that I would never again be the person waiting for the car to come back. I promised myself that I would never again let someone else determine my value based on their ability to see me. One day, I will not be looking in from the outside, I said. One day, I will be the one holding the keys to the house. I touched the cold glass. It burned my fingertips. Up in the penthouse in Chicago, 32-year-old Serenity remembers that burn. I remember the cold of the basement, and I remember the sound of Valerie's laugh through the floorboards. That little girl in the scarf did not know she would become a millionaire. She did not know she would save a company, but she knew one thing. She knew how to endure, and endurance, as Valerie was about to find out, is a weapon that sharpens over time. The letter from Atlantic Tech Institute arrived on a Tuesday in March, the kind of gray, slushy day that made Brookridge feel like a cage made of dirty ice. I opened it by the mailbox at the end of the driveway. My fingers numb from the cold. The first word I saw was "Congratulations," followed immediately by the phrase "full academic scholarship." It was not just a piece of paper, it was an exit strategy. It was a golden ticket that promised to take me 700 miles away from the suffocating silence of my father's house. I stood there, breathing in the exhaust of a passing truck, and for the first time in my life, the air tasted sweet. I walked inside, placing the letter on the kitchen island exactly where I used to place my report cards. When my father came home, I told him. I expected a smile. I expected, perhaps foolishly, a hug. Mark Kingsley picked up the letter. He scanned it, his eyes narrowing not with pride, but with calculation. "It covers tuition," he said, putting the paper down. "But what about housing? What about books? Boston is one of the most expensive cities in the country. Serenity, we do not have a budget allocated for your incidental living expenses." Valerie was chopping vegetables at the counter. She did not turn around. "Boston is so far away," she said, her voice dripping with a performative sadness that never reached her eyes. "Who is going to help with the house? You know your father's back is getting worse. It feels a little selfish, does it not, to just leave us here?" Brandon, who was sitting on a stool eating a sandwich, laughed. He was 17 now, wearing a varsity jacket he had not earned, already carrying the arrogance of a man who expects the world to move out of his way. "Tech school," he scoffed. "You are going to go hang out with a bunch of nerds and stare at screens all day? Good luck with that. No one cares about the back end. Serenity, people care about the face of the company." I looked at them, my father, worrying about pennies while sitting on a fortune. My stepmother, trying to guilt me into servitude. My brother, mocking the very skills that would one day eclipse his entire existence. "I will work," I said. Taking the letter back, "I will cover my own costs. You will not have to pay a dime." I left 2 months later. There was no farewell party. There was no tearful goodbye at the airport gate. I bought a one-way ticket on a Greyhound bus because it was cheaper than flying. I dragged 2 large suitcases down the driveway myself, the wheels clicking rhythmically against the pavement. When I got to the bus station, I took a selfie. It was awkward, just half of my face in the grimy window of the bus, but I wanted to mark the moment. I posted it to the family group chat with a caption that said, "Heading to Boston. See you at Thanksgiving." I watched the screen for an hour as the bus rolled onto the highway. Finally, a notification popped up. It was from Dad, a single thumbs-up emoji. That was it. That was the sum total of my send-off. I turned my phone off. I stared out the window as the flat fields of Ohio gave way to the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, and eventually the dense, urban sprawl of the East Coast. With every mile, the knot in my chest loosened. Boston was a shock to the system. It was loud, aggressive, and brilliant. The wind off the harbor cut through my coat like a razor, but the energy of the city was infectious. I threw myself into Atlantic Tech with the desperation of someone who knows there is no safety net. I lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet student in the front row of the lecture hall, absorbing advanced algorithms and network architecture. By night, and on weekends, I was part of the invisible workforce that kept the city running. I found a job at a medical supply warehouse in South Boston. It was a cavernous, freezing building that smelled of cardboard and disinfectant. My shift ran from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. That warehouse was where I found my true education. It was chaos. I watched as forklifts crisscrossed the floor in a dangerous ballet. I watched as vital shipments of antibiotics were loaded onto the wrong trucks. I watched as drivers argued with dispatchers over lost paperwork. It was a system held together by sticky notes and shouting. One night, a frantic call came in from a hospital downtown. They were missing a crate of specialized heart valves for a surgery scheduled at 6 in the morning. The manager was screaming, tearing through manifests, blaming the driver. I walked over to the computer terminal. It was running an ancient inventory system that looked like it belonged in the 90s. I ignored the interface and pulled up the raw data logs. I traced the scan history. "It is not lost," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "It was scanned onto truck 402 by mistake. That truck is parked at the loading dock in Cambridge right now." The manager looked at me, then at the screen, then back at me. He made a call. 10 minutes later, the driver confirmed the crate was there. That was the moment the lightning struck. I realized that the problem was not the drivers or the boxes. The problem was the blindness. The warehouse did not know what the truck was doing, and the hospital did not know where the warehouse was. They were islands, shouting at each other across an ocean of static. I needed to build a bridge. I stopped sleeping. I survived on black coffee and vending machine crackers. I went to my classes, worked my shift, and then spent every remaining hour in the university computer lab. The library was open 24 hours a day, and I became a fixture there. I started coding. I built a prototype for a system that used real-time tracking tags to link inventory, transport, and receiver into a single, transparent loop. I called it the bridge. It was ugly, raw code, but it was logical. It was fair. I brought the idea to Professor Holloway, my advisor. He was a man with thick glasses and a reputation for failing 50% of his class. "It is ambitious, Taylor," he said, looking at my laptop screen. "But logistics is a messy business. People are unpredictable. You cannot code away human error." "Let me try," I said. I convinced the manager at the warehouse to let me run a pilot program with a small chain of urgent care clinics. For 3 months, I monitored the data. I tweaked the algorithms. I barely ate. I lost 10 pounds. But when the quarter ended, I walked into Holloway's office and slammed a report on his desk. "We reduced lost inventory by 40%. I said, "We cut delivery times by 18%. And we saved the clinics $12,000 in emergency courier fees." He looked at the numbers. He looked at me. For the first time, I saw respect in someone's eyes that had nothing to do with who my father was. "This is not just a class project, is it?" he asked. "No," I said. "This is the future." While I was building my future, my past remained a cold, distant static. The holidays came and went. My dorm mates packed their bags and went home to warm houses and family dinners. I stayed. New Year's Eve of my sophomore year stands out in my memory. The campus was deserted. The snow was piling up against the windows of the computer lab. I had a cup of instant noodles that had gone cold, and a screen full of debugging lines. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Valerie. "Don't forget to call Grandpa tomorrow. He has been asking about you." That was it. Not "how are you?" Not "are you warm?" Not "we miss you." Just a reminder of my obligations. Just a tug on the leash to make sure I was still obedient. I did not reply. I turned back to the screen. I typed a command that optimized the routing algorithm by another 0.5%. "Happy New Year. Serenity," I whispered to myself. I ate the cold noodles. I felt a profound loneliness, an ache that sat right in the center of my chest. But beneath the loneliness was something harder. It was the satisfaction of the bricklayer. I was placing one brick after another. I was building a wall that would one day be too high for them to climb over. It was during my junior year that the worlds began to collide. I was researching potential clients for my expanding software, reading through industry reports on long-term care facilities. I turned a page and saw it, Kingsley Care Group. My grandfather's company was listed in a report about aging infrastructure and financial inefficiencies. The analysis was brutal. It described a company that was heavy on assets, but bleeding cash due to poor management and outdated supply chains. It mentioned rumors of a potential buyout by private equity firms. I stared at the name. Kingsley Care. The company Valerie and Brandon were supposedly leading into a golden age was actually drowning. They were failing. While they were busy buying new cars and patting themselves on the back at country clubs, the foundation was rotting. I realized then that I was on a collision course. I was building the very thing that could save them, and they did not even know I existed. I was the doctor, and they were the dying patient refusing to admit they were sick. I graduated 2 years later, right as the world tilted on its axis. A health crisis hit the country. It was sudden and violent. Supply chains that had held for decades snapped overnight. Masks, ventilators, medications. Everything was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Panic set in. I did not look for a job at a big tech firm. I called 3 of the smartest people I knew from the program. We met in a cramped, shared workspace in downtown Boston that smelled of stale beer and ambition. We are not going to build a resume, I told them. We are going to fix the bleeding. We founded PulseBridge that afternoon. We had no funding, no office, and no sleep. We had my code and a terrifying amount of adrenaline. The first few months were a blur of 20-hour workdays. I remember falling asleep with my head on my desk, waking up with keyboard patterns pressed into my cheek, and immediately getting on a call with a hospital administrator in Chicago who was crying because she had run out of gloves. I routed a shipment from a surplus in Ohio to her dock in 6 hours. She told me I was an angel. I am not an angel, I thought, rubbing my eyes. I am just a girl who knows how to organize the basement. PulseBridge grew. It exploded. We were the only ones who could see the map when the lights went out. Contracts started pouring in. Money started pouring in. But I did not care about the money yet. I cared about the flow. I cared about the fact that for the first time in my life, I was essential. One night, deep in the winter of that first chaotic year, I sat in the office alone. The rest of the team had gone home to sleep. Outside, the Boston snow was swirling against the glass, turning the world white. I looked at the large monitor on the wall. It showed thousands of little green dots moving across the map of the United States. Each dot was a truck. Each dot was a box of medicine. Each dot was a life that was not being left behind because I was watching over it. I pulled up the Kingsley Care stock ticker on a side screen. It was down another 4%. I thought of Brandon, probably complaining about the market. I thought of Valerie, probably blaming the economy. They were helpless. They were drowning in a storm they could not navigate. And here I was, the captain of the only ship that could sail through the ice. I leaned back in my cheap office chair, wrapping my cardigan tighter around myself. I was exhausted. My eyes burned. My back ached. I had not spoken to a member of my family in 8 months. But as I watched those green dots move, tracing lines across the dark country, I realized something. I did not need their seat at the dinner table anymore. I did not need their approval. I had become the gravity that held the system together. They just did not know it yet. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the servers in the rack next to me. It was the sound of a heart beating, my heart, and it was strong enough to survive on its own. The world outside the windows of our cramped co-working space was falling apart, but inside, we were building the only thing that seemed to hold it together. The medical crisis that swept across the nation did not happen like it does in the movies. It was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow, suffocating constriction. Hospitals in the Midwest were running out of ventilators. Clinics in the South were washing and reusing masks. The supply chain had fractured into 1,000 panicked pieces, and no one knew where the inventory was hiding. Except us. PulseBridge was no longer just a piece of code on my laptop. It was a living organism. We had deployed the software to a network of hospitals in the Midwest as a beta test. A desperate Hail Mary pass to keep their loading docks moving. It worked. It worked better than even I had anticipated. My algorithm did not just track boxes. It predicted shortages 3 days before they happened. It rerouted trucks from surplus zones to danger zones automatically. For 6 months, I did not see the sun. My life became a blur of 20-hour workdays, stale coffee, and the blue light of monitors. I stopped being Serenity, the daughter of Mark Kingsley. I became the ghost in the server, the invisible hand moving pallets of life-saving equipment across state lines. The press began to notice. They wrote articles about the nameless platform that had saved the supply lines. They called us the silent saviors of the logistic collapse. I sent a link to one of the articles to the family group chat. "Interesting read," I typed. 2 hours later, Valerie replied, "That is nice, dear. Did you remember to send a card for Brandon's promotion? He is vice president of operations now." I put the phone down. I did not feel anger. I felt a strange, cold clarity. They were rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while I was building the iceberg. Then came the offer. A global logistics conglomerate, a titan of the industry, approached us. They did not want to compete with my code. They wanted to own it. The negotiations were intense, held in glass-walled conference rooms where men in suits twice my age tried to intimidate me. They did not know I had grown up negotiating for my existence at my own dinner table. I did not blink. I sold Pulsebridge for $120 million, plus a retained advisory role and stock options. The deal closed on a rainy Tuesday. I sat in a lawyer's office in downtown Boston, staring at the signature line. The pen felt heavy in my hand. With a few strokes of ink, I was crossing a threshold. I was becoming a person my family could not comprehend. I was becoming powerful. I signed my name. The wire transfer hit my account 4 hours later. I looked at the number on my banking app. It was a string of digits so long it looked like a glitch. I was 29 years old, and I was richer than my father, my stepmother, and my brother combined. And I told absolutely no one. Most people in my position would have bought a bright red sports car. They would have bought a yacht and sailed it into the harbor, screaming their success to the sky. They would have plastered their face on social media. But I did not want noise. I wanted a fortress. I moved to Chicago. It felt right. It was the beating heart of the Midwest, close enough to the Kingsley Empire to watch them, but large enough to swallow me whole. I did not rent an apartment. I contacted a high-end real estate broker and gave them a single instruction. I want to be above the city. I want to see everything, but I do not want anyone to see me. We found the penthouse in River North. It was the entire top floor of a glass needle that pierced the clouds. It had a wraparound balcony that offered a view of the river, the lake, and the endless grid of lights. I bought it through a shell company I incorporated called Northline Holdings. The name meant nothing to anyone else, but to me, it was the direction of the bus I took when I left Ohio, north, away. The closing was quiet. There were no parents to hug me. There were no photos with a sold sign. Just me, a lawyer, and the keys. The first night I spent in the penthouse, I did not turn on the lights. I walked out onto the balcony. The wind was fierce, whipping my hair across my face, but I stood there, gripping the cold steel railing. Below me, Chicago was a canyon of fire and ice. The river wound through the buildings like a dark ribbon, reflecting the amber glow of the street lamps. I looked down at the world. For my entire childhood, I had watched fireworks on a television screen while my family sat in the town square. I had been the observer, the outsider looking through a pane of glass at the celebration. Now the city was my firework display. The skyscrapers were my audience. I started to laugh. It was not a happy laugh, and it was not a sad laugh. It was a sound that came from deep in my lungs, a release of pressure that had been building since I was 8 years old. I laughed until my ribs ached, until the tears cold on my cheeks were indistinguishable from the wind. I had done it. I had climbed out of the basement. I was standing on top of the world, and the people who had put me in the basement had no idea I was looking down on them. Furnishing the penthouse became my therapy. I did not hire a decorator. I did not want a stranger's vision of luxury. I wanted to build a home, something I had never truly possessed. I chose every piece of furniture with deliberate care. A sofa made of deep, soft velvet in charcoal gray. A dining table hewn from a single slab of walnut, long enough to seat 20 people. Lamps that cast a warm, golden light, banishing the shadows I had grown up in. The aesthetic was minimalist, clean lines and open spaces, but it was not cold. It was a sanctuary. I bought a grand piano and placed it by the window. Even though I could not play, I just liked the shape of it. I liked knowing that if I wanted to learn, I could. I liked knowing that the silence in this apartment was a choice, not a sentence imposed by Valerie. But a house, no matter how beautiful, is just a box if it is empty. The holidays approached. The old dread began to creep in, the conditioned reflex of expecting the pity invite or the exclusion. I looked at my long walnut table. It was too big for one person. I thought about the people I had met over the last few years, the people who, like me, did not fit into the neat boxes of society. There was Marcus, my lead engineer at Pulsebridge, who had come out to his parents and never heard from them again. There was Sarah, a friend from my dorm days who was working 3 jobs to pay off her loans and could not afford a flight home to Oregon. There was a distant cousin on my father's side, a young man named Elias, who had tried to be an artist and was promptly mocked by the family until he stopped coming to reunions. I sent out the invitations. Dinner at my place, New Year's Eve. Come as you are. They came. They walked into the elevator lobby looking nervous, shaking snow off their coats. When the doors opened into the penthouse, their jaws dropped. "You live here?" Marcus asked, walking to the window. "Serenity, this is insane." I poured the wine. I served the food. We sat around the walnut table as the snow fell outside, sticking to the glass walls. We were a collection of misfits, a family of spare parts. But as the night went on, as the laughter grew louder and the stories flowed, I realized something profound. This was the best dinner I had ever attended. There was no tension. There was no Valerie criticizing anyone's clothes. There was no Mark bragging about a non-existent achievement. There was just warmth. At midnight, we went out onto the balcony. The city of Chicago erupted. Fireworks bloomed over the lake, red and gold and green. We toasted with champagne. I looked at Elias, who was smiling for the first time in years. I looked at Marcus, who had his arm around his partner. This became my tradition. The penthouse was my second table. It was the place for the people who did not have a seat at the main table. A week later, the bubble was pierced by a notification on my phone. It was an email from my father. Subject, a reminder. I opened it. "Serenity, I saw a post on social media from that cousin of yours, Elias. He mentioned visiting you in Chicago. I hope you are not filling his head with nonsense. Also, Valerie asked me to remind you not to talk too much about your little job. We are dealing with some sensitive negotiations for Kingsley Care, and we do not want people thinking the family is scattered. Perception is everything. Keep your head down. Mark." I stared at the screen. My little job. I had just sold a company for $120 million. I was advising federal agencies on supply chain resilience. And to him, to them, I was still the girl with the little job who needed to keep her head down. They thought Kingsley Care was their internal business. They thought they were the titans of industry dealing with sensitive negotiations. I put the phone down on the marble island. I walked to my office, a room with a wall of monitors that rivaled the setup at Pulsebridge. I sat down in my leather chair. If they wanted to talk about Kingsley Care, we could talk about Kingsley Care. I pulled up the financial reports. I logged into my brokerage account, the one managed by the Taylor Trust. I began to look at the secondary market. Kingsley Care was not a private company anymore. It had gone public 20 years ago. Though the family retained a controlling interest, but there were bonds floating out there. There were small blocks of shares held by disgruntled investors who had seen the stock price plummet under Brandon's incompetent VP tenure. I started buying. I did not make a splash. I did not buy enough to trigger a mandatory disclosure filing. I bought in small, surgical strikes, 1,000 shares here, 5,000 shares there. I bought the debt that the company was struggling to service. I was not doing it to make money. I did not need more money. I was doing it to build a wall around my grandfather's legacy. Valerie and Brandon were preparing to sell the company to strip it down. I was buying the bricks so I could hold the building up. Every share I bought felt like reclaiming a piece of my childhood. Every bond I secured felt like taking back the voice they had stolen from me at the dinner table. I spent hours analyzing their balance sheets. I saw the exorbitant salaries Mark and Valerie were paying themselves. I saw the consulting fees paid to a firm owned by Brandon's college roommate. I saw the neglect in the maintenance budgets for the nursing homes. It made me sick, but it also gave me ammunition. One night in late February, a heavy snowstorm hit Chicago. The city disappeared into a white void. I stood on my balcony, wrapped in a cashmere coat that cost more than the car I drove to college. In one hand, I held a glass of vintage wine. In the other, I held a tablet displaying the latest acquisition report for the Taylor Trust. I now controlled 4% of the outstanding shares. It was not a majority, not even close, but combined with the proxy my grandfather controlled, combined with the debt I held, I was no longer a spectator. I was a player. I looked down into the swirling snow. Somewhere down there, in a hotel suite or a country club, Valerie was probably telling Brandon that everything was under control. She was probably telling Mark that Serenity was harmless, just a distant relative they had to tolerate. They were playing checkers. I was playing three-dimensional chess, and I had already captured their knights without them realizing it. A question formed in my mind, sharp and cold as the winter air. What will they do? I whispered to the storm. What will they do when they realize that the girl they left in the basement is the one holding the keys to the front door? I took a sip of wine. The wind howled around the glass corners of my penthouse, but I was not cold. I had never been warmer. The stage was set. The actors were taking their places, and soon, very soon, the curtain would rise on the final act. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October when the phone rang. The sky outside my office window was a bruised purple, the kind of heavy, overcast autumn sky that presses down on the city of Chicago. I was reviewing a portfolio of municipal bonds, my finger hovering over the delete key, when I saw the caller ID. Grandpa Walter. I stared at the screen. My grandfather did not call me. He was not allowed to call me. For the last 5 years, his communication had been strictly curated by Valerie. Every birthday card I received was signed in her handwriting. Every time I called the house in Milwaukee, she or one of the nurses she had hired would answer, telling me he was resting, or eating, or simply not up for visitors. She had built a wall around him, brick by brick, just as she had built a wall between me and my father. I picked up the phone. "Hello?" I asked, my voice tentative. "Serenity? Is that you?" His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. It was thinner than I remembered, lacking the booming baritone that used to command boardrooms, but the clarity was there. "It is me, Grandpa," I said. "Are you okay? Is Valerie there?" "She is out," he said. "She is at some charity luncheon for the botanical gardens. Brandon is with her. I paid the nurse $50 to go take a long lunch." He let out a wheezing chuckle that turned into a cough. I waited for him to catch his breath. "I need you to come home." "Serenity," he said when the coughing subsided. "Not to the house in Brookridge, to the estate in Milwaukee. Tomorrow. Can you do that?" "Is everything all right?" I asked, already pulling up my calendar and canceling my meetings. "No," he said bluntly. "Everything is wrong. Come alone. Tell no one. Not your father. Especially not your stepmother. Just come." I drove north the next morning. The drive from Chicago to the affluent suburbs of Milwaukee took 2 hours. The trees along the highway were burning with color. Vibrant reds and oranges that felt violent against the gray asphalt. I turned off the interstate and navigated the winding roads that led to the Kingsley estate. It was a massive stone structure, built in the 1920s, sitting behind iron gates that looked like they were designed to keep an army out. I punched in the code he had given me. The gates swung open. I parked my car, a modest sedan I kept for appearances, leaving my luxury vehicle in the city, and walked to the heavy oak door. It opened before I could knock. It was not a servant, it was Grandpa Walter himself, sitting in his motorized wheelchair. He looked small. That was the first thing that hit me. The man who had built Kingsley Care from a single nursing home into a regional empire seemed to have shrunk inside his cardigan. His skin was like parchment paper, translucent and fragile, but his eyes, pale blue and sharp, were the same. "You came," he said. I knelt down and hugged him. He smelled of peppermint, old wool, and the faint, sterile scent of medicine. "Let us go to the study," he said. "We do not have much time before the nurse gets back from her errands." The study was exactly as I remembered it. It was a sanctuary of dark mahogany and leather. The walls were lined with black and white photographs. There was the first facility in 1975, a converted motel with peeling paint. There was the groundbreaking of the flagship center in 1990. There were photos of him with senators, with doctors, with residents. There were no photos of Valerie. He wheeled himself behind his massive desk and motioned for me to sit in the leather wingback chair opposite him. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "They are going to sell it." "Serenity," he said. I stiffened. I knew this. Of course, I had seen the rumors in the financial reports. I had seen the debt restructuring. But hearing him say it made it real. "Who is the buyer?" I asked. "A private equity firm called Apex Capital." He spat the name out like a curse word. "They offered $30 million. $30 million. I repeated. It was a lowball offer. The real estate assets alone were worth $25 million. The brand, the operational licenses, the patient database, it was worth double that. "They want to strip it," Walter said, his hands trembling slightly on the armrests of his chair. "They want to sell the land under the nursing homes for condos and move the residents into crammed, substandard facilities in the next county. They call it efficiency. I call it a slaughter." "Does Dad agree to this?" I asked. "Mark agrees to whatever Valerie whispers in his ear at night," he said bitterly. "Mark is weak. Serenity. He always has been. He thinks $30 million is a fortune. He thinks it will buy him peace. He does not understand that money spent by fools disappears like water in sand." "And Brandon?" "Brandon," he scoffed. "Brandon thinks he is going to be a venture capitalist. He wants the cash to invest in some app his friends are making. They are children playing with fire, and they are going to burn down the only house we have." He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the polished wood toward me. I picked it up. It was heavy. I opened the flap and pulled out the document on top. It was a legal instrument, drafted on thick bond paper. I read the header: "Irrevocable transfer of special voting proxy." I looked up at him. "What is this?" "I am dying. Serenity," he said softly. "Grandpa." "Do not." He cut me off. "I am 82 years old. My heart is working at 40% capacity. My kidneys are failing. I have 6 months, maybe a year if I am stubborn, but my mind is still here, and my mind tells me that if I leave this company to Mark and Valerie, they will destroy it before the grass grows over my grave." He pointed a shaking finger at the document. "That proxy represents the founder's shares. It carries 51% of the voting power for any transaction involving the sale or dissolution of the company. As long as I hold it, they cannot sell without my permission. But Valerie has been pressuring the board. She is trying to have me declared incompetent. She says I am senile. She says I am standing in the way of progress." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Last week, she told me that if I did not sign the sale agreement, she would have to move me into a facility. She said she would find me the best room at the new place Apex Capital is building." A chill ran down my spine. I knew Valerie was cold, but this was monstrous. She was threatening to put him in the very warehouses she was helping to create. "I cannot let them have it," he said, "but I cannot fight them in the boardroom anymore. I cannot shout over them. I need someone who can." He looked me dead in the eye. "I know about Pulsebridge, Serenity." My breath hitched. I had covered my tracks. I had used shell companies. I had never spoken a word of it to the family. "You know?" I subscribe to industry journals, he said, a small smile touching his lips. I saw the name of the founder in the footnotes of the acquisition deal. Serenity Taylor. You used your mother's name. I did, I whispered. I followed the whole thing, he said. I watched you fix the supply chains when the government could not do it. I watched you build $100 million empire while your father was bragging about Brandon's promotion to a job he did not earn. His eyes filled with tears. I am proud of you, he said, and I am ashamed. Ashamed? I am ashamed that I let them push you out, he said. His voice cracked. I remember a Christmas. You were 10. You were standing by the fence in the snow, looking in the window while they opened presents. I saw you. I was sitting in my chair, drinking scotch, and I saw you shivering. And I did nothing. I told myself it was Mark's house. Mark's rules. I told myself not to interfere. He took a deep, ragged breath. That was my sin. Serenity. I let them treat you like a stranger in your own bloodline. And because of that, you became the only one of them who knows how to survive in the cold. You are the only one who knows the value of things, not just the price. He tapped the document again. This establishes the Taylor Trust. You are the trustee. If you sign this, the voting power transfers to you, immediately, not when I die, now. I stared at the paper. The weight of it was immense. This was not just a vote. This was a declaration of war. If I signed this, I was stepping out of the shadows. I was putting a target on my back. I would be challenging my father, my stepmother, and the entire board of directors. If I sign this, I said slowly, it will destroy the family. The family is already destroyed, he said. This is about saving the legacy. It is about saving the 2,000 residents in our homes who have no one else to speak for them. He picked up a fountain pen from the desk. It was a heavy black Mont Blanc. He uncapped it and held it out to me. I do not need you to win. Serenity, he said. I know the odds. They have lawyers. They have the board. They have the momentum. I just need you to show up. I need you to stand in that room and let them see that there is someone left who gives a damn. Do not stand outside the window anymore. Come inside and break the glass. I looked at his hand. It was covered in liver spots. The skin paper thin, shaking with the effort of holding the pen. I thought about the $30 million. I thought about Valerie's smile. I thought about the residents who would be evicted if Apex Capital took over. I took the pen. My hand did not shake. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the same calm I felt when I was coding at 3 a.m, the certainty that there was a problem and I was the solution. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. Serenity Taylor, trustee. Walter let out a long exhale, slumping back into his chair as if a physical weight had been lifted from his chest. He took the document, folded it, and placed it back in the envelope. Take it, he said. Give a copy to my lawyer. Arthur, he is expecting you. He has the duplicate, but keep the original safe. He looked at me one last time, his eyes heavy with fatigue. Now go. Before she comes back, I need to sleep. I feel like I have just run a marathon. I stood up. I kissed his forehead. It was cool and dry. Thank you. Grandpa, I said. For what? He asked, closing his eyes. For seeing me, I said. I left the study and walked down the long hallway to the front door. The house was silent, dust motes dancing in the shafts of afternoon light. I felt the envelope burning against my side inside my handbag. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp and cold. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my heart rate. Well, look who it is. The voice came from the bottom of the steps. I froze. Valerie was standing there. She had just gotten out of her car, a sleek black Mercedes. She was wearing a cream-colored coat and large sunglasses, holding a bouquet of lilies. Brandon was behind her, texting on his phone, looking bored. She walked up the steps, the heels of her boots clicking on the stone. She stopped 2 steps below me, so we were eye to eye. A cloud of perfume surrounded her, something heavy and floral, like gardenias rotting in the sun. It made my stomach turn. I did not know you were in town. Serenity, she said. Her tone was light, conversational, but her mouth was a tight, hard line. I was just passing through, I said, clutching my bag tighter. I wanted to check on Grandpa. How sweet, she said. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes swept over me, analyzing my clothes, my hair, my car in the driveway. She was looking for cracks. You know he gets confused, she said, lowering her voice to a faux whisper. He tells stories, imagines things. I hope he did not upset you with his ramblings. He seemed fine to me, I said. Valerie stepped closer. She reached out and brushed a piece of lint off my coat. The gesture was intimate and invasive at the same time. We are handling everything. Serenity, she said. The business, your father, the estate. It is all very complicated. Adult matters. You do not need to worry your pretty little head about it. Just go back to your… whatever it is you do. Computers? Logistics, I said. Right, she smiled. Logistics. Well, it was nice to see you. But next time, call first. We would hate for you to have a wasted trip. Remember, the Kingsley Care business is not a game for children. She patted my arm. It was the same pat she used to give the dog. Come on. Brandon, she called out, stepping around me to open the door. Let us go see if Grandfather took his pills. I watched the heavy door close behind her. I heard the lock click. I walked to my car. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was racing. She thought she had dismissed me. She thought I was the same little girl she could send to the basement. She had no idea what was in my bag. I got into the driver's seat and tossed the envelope onto the passenger seat. It landed with a heavy thud. $30 million. That was the price she had put on our history. I started the engine. I looked at the rearview mirror, at the imposing stone facade of the mansion. You want to play adult games. Valerie? I whispered to the reflection. Fine. I put the car in gear and drove toward the gate. I was going back to Chicago. I was going back to my penthouse. And I was taking the power of the Kingsley Empire with me. New Year's Eve was 2 months away. The vote was scheduled for the morning after. I touched the envelope one more time. It was not just paper. It was a loaded gun. And for the first time in my life, I was the one with the finger on the trigger. The screen of my phone went dark, but the single word I had typed to Valerie, perfect, still burned in my mind. It was not a surrender. It was the closing of a door I should have bolted shut years ago. She wanted to erase me from the narrative of the Kingsley family. She wanted the board meeting tomorrow to be a coronation for Brandon, unblemished by the presence of the stepdaughter who knew too much. But Valerie had made a critical error. She assumed that isolation was my weakness. She did not realize that for 20 years, isolation had been my training ground, and more importantly, she assumed she was the only one capable of setting a table. I scrolled through my contacts. My finger hovered over the name Aunt Rachel. Rachel was my father's younger sister, in the early days, before Valerie fully clenched her fist around the family social calendar. Rachel used to bring me sneaking bags of gummy bears when I was grounded, but over the last decade, she had faded. She stopped coming to the summer barbecues. She claimed she was busy during Thanksgiving. The family narrative, spun by Valerie, was that Rachel was difficult and drifting away. I suspected the truth was much simpler. I suspected Rachel was just tired of being treated like a prop in the background of the Valerie and Mark show. I pressed the call button. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up when she answered. Her voice sounded thick, as if she had been sleeping, or perhaps crying. Serenity? She asked. Is everything okay? Hi, Aunt Rachel, I said, keeping my voice steady. I know it is late. I just got a text from Valerie. There was a heavy pause on the other end. Then, a sigh that sounded like it came from the bottom of a deep well. I got one too, Rachel said softly. She said the dinner tonight is for the core decision-makers only. She said the hotel suite is too small for a big gathering. It is a 2,000-square-foot suite, Serenity, but apparently there is no room for the sister of the founder. She uninvited you? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She uninvited everyone, Rachel said. Her voice cracked with a mixture of hurt and exhaustion. Me, your Uncle Andrew, Aunt Nora, even the cousins. She told us to just meet in the lobby tomorrow morning for the vote. It is humiliating. Serenity. I am 55 years old, and I am being told to wait in the hallway while the adults talk. The anger flared in my chest, hot and sharp. It was exactly as I suspected. Valerie was scrubbing the stage. She wanted to present a unified front to the lawyers and the board members at dinner, and she could not risk Rachel making a sarcastic comment or Uncle Andrew wearing the wrong tie. Rachel, I said, listen to me. Do not go to the hotel lobby tomorrow morning feeling small, and do not sit in your room tonight ordering room service. What else am I going to do? She asked. Mark is not taking my calls. I am hosting a dinner, I said. You? She sounded confused. But you are in Chicago. Where? I have a place, I said. A big place. And I have a table that is not full. I want you to come. I want Andrew to come. I want Nora and the kids. I want everyone who was told there was no room for them. Serenity, she hesitated. Valerie will be furious if she finds out we are organizing a separate faction. Let her be furious, I said, my voice hardening. We are not a faction, Rachel. We are the family. If she does not want to feed us, we will feed ourselves. Will you come? There was silence for 3 seconds. Then, I heard the shift in her tone. The resignation was replaced by a spark of defiance. Send me the address, she said. I will call Andrew. He is sitting in the hotel bar downstairs nursing a beer and complaining to the bartender. He will be thrilled. I hung up and went to work. For the next hour, I was not a CEO, I was a connector. I called Uncle Andrew, who roared with laughter when I told him I was hijacking the rejected guest list. I called Aunt Nora, who started crying because she had bought a new dress for the dinner and thought she would have to wear it to watch television alone. I called my cousins, people I had not spoken to since I was a teenager in braces. The response was universal. It was a collective exhale. They were not angry at me for being distant all these years. They were just relieved that someone had finally turned on a light in the dark room Valerie had put them in. Then, I made the final call, the most dangerous one. I dialed the private number for the suite at the Drake Hotel, not the main line Valerie would answer, but the mobile number of the private nurse who was attending to my grandfather. I had bribed her months ago to keep a line of communication open. Hello? The nurse whispered. Let me speak to him, I said. Quickly. A moment later, the rustling of sheets, and then the rasping breath of Walter Kingsley. Serenity? Grandpa, I said. Valerie told me not to come. She uninvited Rachel and the others too. I know, he said. His voice was weak, vibrating with suppressed rage. She told me it was for my health. She said too many people would tire me out before the vote. She is feeding me broth in a room that smells like sanitizer. Serenity, I feel like a prisoner. Pack a bag, I said. What? I am sending a car for you, a medical transport. I do not want you sleeping in that hotel tonight. The air is toxic. Come to my place. Rachel is coming. Andrew is coming. Everyone is coming. Serenity, he wheezed. Valerie will have a stroke. Valerie thinks you are asleep, I said. Leave a note. Tell her you needed a change of scenery for your health. Tell her you will see her at the vote. Just get out of there, Grandpa. Come see what I have built. He was silent for a long time. I could hear the hum of the medical equipment in the background. I want to see it, he whispered. I want to see where you went when you walked away. I will have the car there in 20 minutes, I said. I hung up and immediately switched modes. I had 3 hours before guests arrived. I had a penthouse that looked like a museum, and I needed it to feel like a sanctuary. I called a chef I knew. His name was Mateo. He was 26 years old, a culinary prodigy who ran a small, struggling bistro in the West Loop. But I did not hire him because of his food, though it was excellent. I hired him because 3 years ago, his mother had passed away in a Kingsley care facility. He had written a letter to the corporate office thanking the staff for holding her hand when he could not get there in time. Valerie had ignored the letter. I had framed a copy of it in my office as a reminder of what we were actually fighting for. "Matteo," I said when he answered, "I need a favor, a big one, private dinner, tonight, 15 people. "Tonight?" He laughed nervously. "Serenity, I have prep to do for tomorrow." "I will pay you triple," I said. "But there is a catch. I do not want Michelin star food. I do not want foam or liquid nitrogen. I want warmth. I want pumpkin soup. I want roast chicken with herbs. I want that mac and cheese with the Gruyere crust you made for the staff party last year. And I want apple pie." "Comfort food," he said, understanding immediately. "Soul food," I corrected. "I have a room full of people who have been freezing for a long time. I need you to thaw them out." "I am on my way," he said. Next, security. I contacted the building manager. I authorized a temporary access code for the private elevator. I gave him the names. I told him that under no circumstances was anyone named Mark, Valerie, or Brandon Kingsley allowed past the lobby. This was a fortress. Tonight, the drawbridge was up. I moved through the penthouse, adjusting the atmosphere. I dimmed the sharp, architectural lighting and turned on the warm floor lamps. I lit candles, dozens of them, placing them on the mantel, on the side tables, on the piano. I went to my sound system and queued up a playlist. No aggressive pop, no classical dirges. I chose jazz, soft, rhythmic, alive, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, music that filled the silence without demanding attention. I went to the bar. I looked at the bottles of expensive scotch and vodka. I put them away. Tonight was not about getting drunk to tolerate each other, which was the standard operating procedure at Valerie's parties. I pulled out bottles of rich red wine, Pinot Noir and Cabernet. I set out pitchers of iced tea and lemonade for the cousins. Then, I went to my office. I opened a locked drawer and pulled out a stack of photo albums I had rescued from the basement in Ohio before I left. I had digitized them years ago, but the physical prints had a power that screens lacked. I sat on the floor and started pulling photos. There was a picture of Uncle Andrew holding me on his shoulders when I was 5. There was a picture of Aunt Rachel teaching me to braid hair. There was a picture of Aunt Nora laughing at a picnic, before her husband left her and the family branded her a mess. I found heavy cream cardstock and wrote notes. I did not write generic greetings. I wrote the truth. To Aunt Rachel, "Thank you for the gummy bears. I never forgot." To Uncle Andrew, "You were the only one who made me laugh when I wanted to cry." To Aunt Nora, "You are not invisible, not to me." I placed a photo and a note at each place setting on the long walnut table. I was not giving them diamond watches or designer bags. I was giving them back their history. I was giving them proof that they existed in a family that had tried to edit them out. My phone pinged with an email notification. It was from the lawyer, Arthur. "Meeting confirmed, 8:00 a.m. Tomorrow, pre-vote strategy session, just you, me, and Walter." I smiled. I quickly typed a new email, CCing Grandpa's private account. "Confirmed. The proxy is ready. See you before the storm." I hit send. At the exact same moment, a notification popped up from the family email chain. It was a message from Valerie to the board of directors, blind copying the family. "Dear members of the board, we are looking forward to tomorrow's decisive vote. Please note that my stepdaughter, Serenity, sends her regrets. She is currently tied up with personal matters and will not be attending the family dinner or the vote. We ask that you respect her privacy as she deals with her own challenges." I stared at the screen. Personal matters. Challenges. She was painting a picture of a troubled, unstable woman who could not handle the pressure. She was erasing me in real time. I looked up from the phone. Matteo was in the kitchen, the smell of roasting garlic and thyme beginning to fill the vast space of the penthouse. The candles were flickering against the glass walls. The table was set, not with the cold porcelain of a hotel banquet, but with mismatched, beautiful warmth. I was not erased. I was right here, and I was about to host the most important dinner of my life. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Taylor," the concierge said, "your first guest is here. Medical transport. He is coming up." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I walked to the private elevator doors. I smoothed down my dress. It was not a power suit. It was a soft cashmere dress in deep navy blue. I was not dressing for war tonight. I was dressing for peace. The elevator machinery hummed. The light above the door turned green. The doors slid open. Walter Kingsley sat in his wheelchair, an oxygen tank hooked to the back. He looked frail, wrapped in a thick coat and a scarf that looked too big for him, but his eyes were wide open. He looked out at the penthouse. He saw the floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the Chicago skyline, a billion glittering diamonds of light stretching to the horizon. He saw the warm glow of the lamps. He smelled the roasting chicken. He heard the soft notes of a saxophone drifting through the air. He did not speak for a long moment. He just stared, taking in the sheer scale of the life I had built in secret. I stepped forward. "Welcome home, Grandpa," I said softly. He wheeled himself out of the elevator, the rubber tires silent on the marble floor. He stopped in the center of the room and looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "You did this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "You built all of this?" "Pulsebridge built this," I said. "But tonight, it is just a house, and it needed a family." He looked toward the long table, seeing the name cards, the photos, the waiting empty chairs that would soon be filled by the people he had missed for years. "Valerie told me you lived in a studio," he said, a small, incredulous smile breaking across his face. "She told me you were struggling." "Valerie was wrong," I said. The elevator dinged again. This time, it was Rachel and Andrew. I could hear Andrew's booming laugh before the doors even fully opened. "I am telling you, if this is a hostel, it is the nicest hostel I have ever seen," Andrew was saying. They stepped out. They froze. Rachel dropped her purse. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Serenity?" she gasped. "Come in," I said, opening my arms. "Dinner is almost ready." As I watched them rush toward me, watched the shock turn into delight, watched my grandfather turn his chair to greet his children with a smile I had not seen in a decade, I realized something. Valerie had the title. She had the hotel suite. She had the $30 million contract on the table. But she did not have this. I looked at the reflection in the glass window. Behind me, the room was filling with noise and life. The city of Chicago was shining below us, cold and distant. But up here, on the 42nd floor, the fire was finally lit. "Let them have their meeting," I whispered to myself. "We have the vote." I turned back to my family. The table was ready. And for the first time in the history of the Kingsley family, the people sitting at it were the ones who actually deserved to be there. The wind on the 42nd floor was not like the wind on the ground. It was cleaner, sharper, and it carried a silence that felt almost holy. I stood on the balcony with my grandfather, Walter Kingsley. He was wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket I had draped over his wheelchair, his hands resting on the steel railing. We were looking down at the city of Chicago, but specifically, we were looking at the Drake Hotel. From this height, the hotel looked like a toy set. It was a block of illuminated limestone, glowing with a golden, artificial warmth. Inside that building, in a suite that cost $5,000 a night, my father and stepmother were currently hosting a cocktail hour. They were clinking crystal glasses. They were shaking hands with lawyers. They were preparing to sell the soul of our family for $30 million. Grandpa leaned forward, his breath clouding in the cold air. "They look so small from here," he whispered. "They are small, Grandpa," I said. He turned his chair around to look back into the living room. I had slid the glass doors open just enough to let the music drift out, a slow, melodic jazz track that sounded like rain on a pavement. He wheeled himself inside, and I followed, closing the door against the wind. "I want to show you something," I said. I took him to the long hallway that led to the bedrooms. In most penthouses, this space would be filled with abstract art or mirrors to make the space look bigger. In my home, I had filled it with faces. I had framed black and white photographs of the people Pulsebridge had helped. There was a close-up of an elderly woman in Ohio holding a fresh delivery of insulin. There was a man in a wheelchair in Florida, waving at a delivery truck, and interspersed with them were older photos I had digitized from Grandpa's archives, the first residents of the very first Kingsley care home. Grandpa stopped his chair. He stared at a photo of a woman named Mrs. Higgins, a resident who had no family and used to knit sweaters for the staff. I had blown the image up so you could see every stitch in her work and every line on her face. "You kept them," he said, his voice thick. "I never forgot them." I said, "Valerie sees real estate. Brandon sees a balance sheet. I see Mrs. Higgins. That is why I built Pulsebridge. It is why I built this apartment. It is a place for the people who used to have to sit in the hallway." He reached out and touched the glass of the frame. I saw a tear track through the deep lines of his cheek, but he did not wipe it away. The elevator chime broke the moment. It was a soft, polite sound that announced the arrival of the first wave of exiles. I walked to the foyer as the doors slid open. Aunt Rachel stood there, clutching her purse like a shield. Beside her was Uncle Andrew, wearing a suit that was at least 10 years out of style. He was holding a plastic bag that clinked. "We brought wine," Andrew said, holding up the bag. "It was a 2 for $15 special from the corner store. I did not know if you had—" His voice trailed off as he stepped into the room. He looked at the 20-foot ceilings. He looked at the floating staircase. He looked at the panoramic view of the skyline that stretched out like a blanket of diamonds. "Holy Mother of God," Andrew whispered. "Serenity? You live here?" "Come in," I said, smiling. "And yes, Uncle Andrew, I live here." Rachel dropped her bag. She walked over to me and hugged me so hard I lost my breath. It was a hug that carried 10 years of missed birthdays and silent apologies. "I thought you were in a studio," she sobbed into my shoulder. "Valerie said you were barely making rent." "Valerie does not know everything," I said, pulling back to look at her. Within 20 minutes, the penthouse was full. My cousins, Sarah and Mike, arrived with their partners. Aunt Nora came in, looking timid until she saw Grandpa Walter sitting by the fireplace with a mug of cider. The room filled with a noise I had not heard in years, the sound of genuine, unguarded shock. They wandered around the room, touching the velvet sofas, looking at the Pulsebridge supply map on the wall, trying to reconcile the silent, invisible girl they remembered with the woman who owned the sky. 4 blocks away, the scene was very different. In the presidential suite of the Drake Hotel, the air was conditioned to a perfect, sterile 68 degrees. Valerie stood by the faux fireplace, wearing an emerald green evening gown that hugged her body like a second skin. It was the kind of dress that screamed money. She held a glass of champagne, her knuckles white around the stem. Brandon stood next to her. He was wearing a tuxedo that looked new. His hair gelled back. He was checking his reflection in the mirror every 30 seconds. "Where is everyone?" Brandon asked, looking at the room. There were only 8 people there. The lawyers from the private equity firm, 2 financial advisors, and a member of the board who was loyal to Mark. "They are late," Valerie snapped, "or they are being difficult. Your Aunt Rachel has always been dramatic. She probably stayed home to make a point." Mark was walking in circles near the buffet table. He looked tired. He kept glancing at his phone, perhaps hoping for a text from me, or from his father, or from anyone who could tell him he was doing the right thing. "Stop pacing, Mark," Valerie hissed. "You are making the investors nervous. Go tell Mr. Henderson about Brandon's vision for the post-sale restructuring." Mark nodded, putting on a plastic smile. Right, the vision, of course. Back in the penthouse, there was no posturing. There was only the smell of roasted chicken and sage. I had set the long walnut table with simple white plates and linen napkins. I did not use place cards. I told everyone to sit wherever they wanted. There was no head of the table, no foot of the table. It was an oval of democracy. I guided Grandpa Walter to the center spot. Facing the window, I sat on his right. Aunt Rachel sat on his left. Uncle Andrew sat next to me, pouring his grocery store wine into my crystal glasses with a defiant grin. I looked around the table. These were the people who had been told they were too loud, too poor, or too messy for the Kingsley image, and yet Here they were, glowing in the candlelight. I stood up to make a toast. I picked up my glass. I tapped a spoon against the rim. The chatter died down. I do not have a speech. I said, I just have a thank you. For a long time, I thought family was about who sat at the head of the table. I thought it was about who got the biggest presents or who had the loudest voice. I looked at Valerie's empty chair in my mind, and then I looked at the full chairs in front of me. I was wrong, I continued. Family is just the people who show up when it is cold outside. Thank you for coming to my home. Thank you for filling the empty seats. Uncle Andrew raised his glass. To Serenity, he boomed. The dark horse who won the race while we were not looking. Everyone laughed. It was a real laugh, deep and belly-shaking. As we began to eat, passing bowls of pumpkin soup and platters of roasted vegetables, I glanced toward the bookshelf in the corner. Nestled between a first edition of Great Expectations and a ceramic vase was a small, black lens. It was a high-definition camera, one of 3 I had installed in the room. I had not turned them on to spy. I had turned them on because I wanted to record this. I wanted proof, for myself, that I had built a family out of the wreckage. The red recording light was taped over, invisible to the guests, but I knew it was blinking. While we were breaking bread, Valerie was breaking spirits. In the hotel suite, the dinner had been served. It was filet mignon, small and perfectly plated, cold in the center. Valerie was holding court with Mr. Henderson, the lead attorney for the Apex Capital buyout. It is a shame your stepdaughter could not be here, Mr. Henderson said, cutting his meat. We would have liked to meet all the shareholders. Serenity is a sweet girl, Valerie said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. But she is fragile. She has never really had a head for business. She gets overwhelmed easily. We thought it was best to keep her away from the stress of the negotiation. Mark looked down at his plate. He knew it was a lie. He knew I had graduated with honors. He knew I ran a company, but he said nothing. He took a sip of wine and swallowed the lie along with it. She does not understand the complexities of elder care, Brandon added, wiping his mouth. She thinks with her heart, not her head. In this business, you need to be tough. That is why I'm taking point on the transition. Back in the penthouse, the mood had shifted. The plates were cleared. The apple pie was being served. The jazz music had softened to a low hum. Grandpa Walter cleared his throat. The sound was rasping, but it cut through the conversation instantly. He placed his hands on the table. They were shaking, but he pressed them flat against the wood to steady them. I want to tell you a story, he said. The room went silent. Even the cousins stopped scrolling on their phones. 50 years ago, I did not have a company, Walter said. I had a boarding house in Milwaukee. It was a drafty old place. I had one tenant, a man named Mr. Miller. He was 70 years old. His son had dropped him off with a suitcase and never came back. Grandpa looked at the candle flame flickering in front of him. Mr. Miller died alone in that room on Christmas Eve. He continued, I found him 3 days later. He had a picture of his family in his hand. That was the day I decided to build Kingsley Care. Not to make money, not to build an empire, but to make sure that no one else had to die holding a picture of people who did not want them. Tears were streaming down Aunt Nora's face. I reached out and took Grandpa's hand. His skin was paper dry. Over the years, I forgot that, Walter said. I let the suits and the dividends cloud my vision. I let my own son turn the company into a ledger. And I let my wife, and then Valerie, push the people who really mattered to the edges of the room. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. The intensity in his blue eyes was searing. I looked around this table tonight, he said, his voice gaining strength, and I see the family I failed. I see the people who were told they were not enough. And sitting next to me is the only one of you who understood what it felt like to be Mr. Miller. He squeezed my hand. Serenity did not just build a logistics company, he announced. She built a way for things to be found when they were lost, and that is why, yesterday afternoon, I signed a document. Uncle Andrew leaned forward. What document? Pop? The special voting proxy, Walter said. The $30 million vote. It does not belong to Mark. It does not belong to me anymore. He looked around the table, making eye contact with every single person. I gave it to Serenity. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a room where the air had been sucked out. Rachel gasped. Andrew dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "You gave her the vote?" Andrew whispered. "She is the trustee," Walter said firmly. "Tomorrow morning, when we walk into that room, Serenity is the voice of Kingsley Care. She is the one who decides if we sell or if we fight." I felt the weight of everyone's stare. It was not jealousy. I saw hope in Rachel's eyes. I saw vindication in Andrew's grin. I saw a profound respect in the eyes of my cousins. I squeezed Grandpa's hand back. "I will not let you down," I whispered. The dinner wound down an hour later. The energy in the room had changed. It was electric. People were hugging, making plans to meet for breakfast, exchanging numbers. They were no longer the cast-offs. They were the insiders. As the last cousin got into the elevator, thanking me for the third time, the penthouse fell quiet again. The staff was clearing the dishes in the kitchen. Grandpa was resting in the guest suite I had prepared for him, finally sleeping in a bed that was not in a hotel controlled by his daughter-in-law. I walked out onto the balcony one last time. The wind had died down. The city was still awake, a grid of amber and white. I looked down at the Drake Hotel. The lights in the presidential suite were dark. The party was over. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen was bright in the darkness. It was a text message. Sender, Valerie. My stomach tightened. I opened the message. "I know you are in town. The doorman told me he saw your car. Come to the hotel. Suite 412. Now, just you. We need to have a private family conversation before the vote." I stared at the words. Private family conversation. It was the code word for an ambush. It was the summons to the principal's office. I looked back at the guest room where my grandfather was sleeping safely. I looked at the camera on the bookshelf, its red light still taping over, but the lens wide open. I typed a reply. On my way. I turned off the screen. I went to my bedroom and changed out of my soft cashmere dress. I put on a blazer, sharp, tailored, armor. I checked my pocket to make sure I had the one thing Valerie did not know about, a simple ballpoint pen, or at least, it looked like one. I walked to the elevator. The warmth of the dinner was behind me. The cold of the hotel was ahead. "I am coming. Valerie," I whispered as the doors closed, sealing me in the metal box. "But I am not coming alone. I am bringing every ghost you ever tried to bury." The morning of the vote broke over Chicago like a bruise. The sky a heavy, swollen shade of charcoal gray. It was 7 a.m. Inside the penthouse, the air was still warm with the remnants of the previous night's dinner, smelling faintly of coffee and sage. I walked into the guest suite. Grandpa Walter was sitting up in bed, looking more rested than I had seen him in years. Aunt Rachel was sitting in the armchair next to him, reading the morning news on her tablet. "I have to go," I said, standing in the doorway. Rachel looked up, alarmed. "Go where? The meeting is not until 10. "Valerie wants to see me," I said, "alone." "Do not go," Grandpa said, his voice sharp. "It is a trap. Serenity. She wants to rattle you." "I know," I said, smoothing the lapels of my black blazer. "That is why I have to go. If I do not show up, she will tell the board I am unstable or afraid. I need to look her in the eye." I walked over to the bed and kissed his cheek. "Stay here with Rachel. I will see you in the boardroom. Do not be late." I left the sanctuary of the penthouse and took the elevator down. The descent felt like sinking into deep water. The air pressure changed, heavy and suffocating. I walked the 4 blocks to the Drake Hotel in the biting wind. My face was numb by the time I reached the revolving doors, but my mind was razor sharp. I took the elevator to the 4th floor, suite 412. I knocked. "Come in, it is open." Valerie's voice. It was light, airy, the voice she used when she was ordering a salad or dismissing a maid. I pushed the door open. The suite was expansive, decorated in cream and gold, with heavy velvet drapes pulled half shut against the gray morning light. Valerie was standing by the window, her back to me. She was wearing a silk dressing gown that probably cost more than my first car. "Shut the door, Serenity," she said without turning around. I closed the door. The click of the latch sounded loud in the silent room. "Where is Dad?" I asked. "Your father is downstairs having breakfast with Brandon," Valerie said, finally turning to face me. She held a cup of tea in both hands. Her face was perfectly made up, not a hair out of place, but there was a tightness around her eyes that concealer could not hide. I told them I wanted a moment with my daughter. "I am not your daughter," I said calmly. "Stepdaughter," she corrected, walking over to the sitting area. She gestured to a plush armchair. "Sit down. Take off your coat. You look tense." I hesitated, then unbuttoned my blazer. I took it off and draped it carefully over the back of the chair opposite her. I sat down, keeping my posture straight. "What do you want, Valerie?" She set her tea down on the coffee table. Next to the cup lay a thin document folder. She slid it toward me with a manicured finger. "I want to protect you," she said. "I know you think this new responsibility Grandpa gave you is a gift, but it is not. Serenity, it is a burden. Managing a company like Kingsley Care requires grit. It requires ruthlessness. It is not like playing with computers in a warehouse." I looked at the folder. "What is this?" "It is a family agreement," she said soothingly. "It is very simple. You sign the proxy rights over to Mark and Brandon. We handle the vote today. We handle the sale. And in exchange, we have authorized a generous ex gratia payment for you." "Ex gratia," I repeated. "Payment out of kindness." $300,000, she said, watching my face closely. "Tax-free. It is a lot of money. Serenity, you could pay off your student loans. You could buy a nice little condo in the suburbs. You could stop struggling." I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, but I swallowed it. $300,000. She was offering me pennies to sell a legacy. She truly had no idea who I was. "And if I sign?" I asked. "Then we all save face," she said, leaning forward. "You do not have to embarrass yourself in the boardroom trying to understand complex financials. Grandpa does not have to see the family fighting. We present a united front. We sell to Apex. We secure everyone's future, and you go back to your life. Everyone wins." I reached out and opened the folder. I scanned the first page. It was exactly as she said, a total surrender of power for a check that would not even cover the taxes on my penthouse. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward her. "No," I said. The room went very quiet. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette seemed to grow louder. Valerie blinked. "Excuse me?" I said no, I repeated, my voice steady. "I am not signing this. I am not assigning the proxy to Mark or Brandon. I am going to the meeting, and I am voting my conscience." "Your conscience?" Valerie let out a short, sharp laugh. "Since when do you have a conscience about this business? You have never set foot in one of those nursing homes. You are a ghost. Serenity. You do not exist in this world." "I exist enough for Grandpa to trust me," I said, "and I know enough to know that selling to Apex is a mistake. I am not doing this to fight you. Valerie, I am doing it because the company matters." Her mask slipped. The benevolent mother figure vanished, replaced by something cold and ugly. Her lips curled back from her teeth. "You little fool," she hissed. "You think because Walter is going senile and signed a piece of paper, you suddenly have a seat at the table? You are a mistake. Serenity. You have always been a mistake." "Is that so?" I asked. "You are a mousy little orphan with delusions of grandeur," she spat. "Mark only kept you around out of guilt. I tried to make you presentable. I tried to mold you into something useful, but you were always happiest in the dirt, in that basement. That is where you belong, with the dust and the broken things, not in a boardroom with adults." "Grandpa does not think so," I said quietly. "He told me he watched you push me out. He saw it all. Valerie, the gifts, the exclusion. He knows. That was the spark. Valerie stood up abruptly. Her face flushed a violent red. She marched around the coffee table, looming over me. "Walter is a dying old man who does not know what day it is," she screamed. "And you are a parasite trying to steal my son's inheritance." She reached out and grabbed my upper arm. Her fingers dug into my flesh, sharp and painful. She squeezed hard, shaking me. "You think I will let a little girl like you ruin Brandon's future?" she growled, her face inches from mine. "I spent 20 years building this life. I will not let you burn it down." "Let go of me," I said, my voice dropping to a warning tone. "I will let go when you sign that paper," she shouted. "Valerie, take your hand off me." She did not let go. Instead, the rage seemed to snap something inside her. She pulled me up from the chair and shoved me backward. I stumbled, my hip hitting the edge of the heavy oak desk. Pain shot down my leg. Before I could regain my balance, she swung. Her open palm connected with the side of my face. It was a sharp, stinging crack that echoed in the room. My head snapped to the side. I stood there, stunned. My cheek burned. I could taste copper in my mouth where my tooth had cut the inside of my lip. "Sign it!" she screamed, raising her hand again. She slapped me a second time, harder. I fell back against the desk, gripping the edge to keep from sliding to the floor. My ear was ringing. I looked up at her. Her chest was heaving. Her eyes were wild, dilated with adrenaline and fury. She looked at her own hand, then at me, as if surprised by the violence she had just unleashed. But she did not apologize. She stepped forward, grabbing my blazer from the chair where I had left it, intending to throw it at me. "Get out," she breathed. "Get out and do not come back until you have signed that paper." I stood up slowly. I touched my cheek. It was hot and throbbing. I looked at my arm where her fingers had dug in. The red marks were already deepening into purple bruises. I did not cry. I did not scream. A strange, icy calm washed over me. "Thank you," I said. Valerie froze. The blazer clutched in her hand. "What?" "Thank you," I repeated. "For years, people told me I was imagining it. They told me you were just strict. They told me I was too sensitive. But now," I looked her dead in the eye. "Now everyone will understand exactly how you treat family." Valerie sneered. "Who is going to believe you? It is your word against mine. I will tell them you attacked me. I will tell them you were hysterical." "They do not have to believe me," I said. "They just have to watch." I pointed to the blazer in her hands. Valerie looked down. She was holding the jacket by the collar. The front pocket was gaping slightly open. Inside, clipped securely to the fabric, was a silver pen. But it was not just a pen. At the very top, a tiny pinprick light was blinking. Red, blink, red, blink. Valerie's breath hitched. She stared at the light. I stepped forward and gently took the blazer from her frozen hands. I reached into the pocket and pulled out the pen. I held it up between us. "High-definition recording," I said softly. "Audio and video, 180-degree wide-angle lens. Battery life of 4 hours." I pressed the top button. The red light went solid, then turned off. "I turned it on before I knocked on the door," I said. Valerie's face went the color of ash. She stumbled back, her legs hitting the coffee table. She collapsed onto the sofa, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. "You," she whispered, "you would not." "You called me a ghost," I said, slipping the pen into my pants pocket. "You were right. Ghosts watch, and ghosts remember." I put my blazer on. I buttoned it carefully, wincing slightly as the fabric brushed against the bruise on my arm. "Give it to me," she croaked. She lunged forward, grabbing at my pocket. I caught her wrist. I did not squeeze. I just held it there, stopping her effortlessly. "Do not touch me again," I said. My voice was low, devoid of emotion. "If you touch me again, I will call the police right now. Do you want to be arrested in your dressing gown on the morning of the biggest deal of your life? She pulled her hand back as if burned. She curled into the corner of the sofa, shaking. You will not show that to anyone, she said, her voice trembling, trying to find its old authority but failing. It would destroy your father. It would destroy the company name. You do not have the stomach for it. I looked at her. She looked small, pitiful, a bully who had finally picked a fight with someone who hit back. See you in the boardroom, Valerie, I said. I turned and walked out. I did not slam the door. I closed it quietly, leaving her alone in the dim, expensive silence of the suite. I walked down the hallway to the elevator. My legs were shaking now. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the throbbing pain in my cheek and the ache in my arm. I pressed the button and leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the wall. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. I was alone. I pulled my phone out. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped it. I connected to the pen wirelessly. The file transferred in seconds. Video 001 MP4. I attached the file to an email. I typed 2 addresses, Arthur Penhaligon, attorney at law, and my own secure cloud server. Subject, evidence. I hit send. I watched the progress bar. Sent. I let out a breath that sounded like a sob, but I swallowed it back. I touched the red mark on my cheek. It would darken within the hour. There was no hiding it. Makeup would not cover the swelling. Good. The elevator dinged for the lobby. I did not get out. I pressed the button for the conference level. I watched the numbers climb. Floor 2, floor 3. I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall of the elevator. My hair was slightly messed up. My cheek was turning a violent shade of crimson. My eyes looked dark, haunted. But I did not look like a victim. I looked like a survivor. They told me to be quiet, I whispered to the reflection. I traced the line of my jaw where she had struck me. All my life, they told me to sit in the corner and be quiet. The elevator slowed. But today, I said, straightening my spine as the doors began to open. Today, they gave me a voice. I stepped out into the hallway leading to the boardroom. The lights were bright. The air smelled of coffee and expensive cologne. I could hear the murmur of voices from behind the double mahogany doors. I gripped the pen in my pocket. I gripped the phone in my hand. I was ready. The conference room on the mezzanine level of the Drake Hotel was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space of dark mahogany paneling, heavy velvet drapes, and a table that looked long enough to land a small aircraft on. The air was chilled to a crisp, sterile temperature, smelling of stale coffee and the leather bindings of legal pads. I walked in 5 minutes early and took the seat I had been trained to occupy since I was 6 years old. The chair at the very end of the table, the corner, the spot furthest from the power, usually reserved for junior associates or people taking minutes. I sat with my back to the wall, my hands folded in my lap to stop them from trembling. The room filled up quickly. There were 12 men in charcoal suits. Half of them were from the board of directors of Kingsley Care, men who had known my grandfather for decades, but had slowly been seduced by my father's promises of quick dividends. The other half were the sharks from Apex Capital, the private equity firm looking to swallow us whole. They checked their watches and tapped on their tablets, their eyes sliding over me without pausing. To them, I was just part of the furniture. At 9:55, the double doors swung open. Valerie entered first. She had changed out of her dressing gown into a sharp, white power suit that looked like it had been cut from a sheet of ice. She walked with her chin up, her eyes bright and hard. She scanned the room, smiling at the investors, nodding at the board members. Her gaze swept over me for a fraction of a second. She saw the bruise. There was no missing it. My left cheekbone was swollen, a dark, angry purple blooming under the layer of foundation I had tried to apply. She did not blink. She did not wince. She simply looked through me, as if the injury she had inflicted less than 2 hours ago was a smudge on a window pane. Behind her came Mark, my father, looking nervous and sweaty in a suit that suddenly seemed too big for him, and then Brandon. Brandon strode in like he already owned the building, He was grinning, shaking hands with the Apex lawyers, making jokes about the weather. He walked to the head of the table, where 2 chairs were positioned. One was clearly for the chairman, my grandfather. The other, to its right, was empty. Brandon placed his leather portfolio on the empty chair. He adjusted his tie, looking around the room with a smug satisfaction. "Good morning, gentlemen," Valerie announced, her voice projecting clearly across the room. "Thank you for being here on such a momentous day. I believe we are ready to secure the future of this company." She gestured to Brandon. "I would like to introduce Brandon Kingsley," she said, "our Vice President of Operations and the architect of the transition strategy. He represents the new energy of Kingsley Care." Brandon nodded, puffing out his chest. "Excited to get this done," he said. I sat in my corner, silent. I felt the throb of my cheek pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Then, the side door opened. The room went quiet. Grandpa Walter was wheeled in by his nurse. He looked different than he had at the penthouse the night before. He looked frailer, slumped slightly in his chair, a blanket tucked around his legs. But I saw his eyes. They were moving, darting from face to face, assessing the battlefield. The nurse parked him at the head of the table. Brandon immediately sat down in the chair next to him, leaning in. "Morning, Grandpa. We have everything set up. You just need to nod." Grandpa did not look at him. He stared straight ahead at the screen at the far end of the room. "Let us begin. Mr. Henderson," the lead attorney for Apex Capital, said. He was a man with silver hair and a voice like grinding gravel. "We have the acquisition agreement prepared. $30 million for a 100% buyout of all assets, branding, and operational licenses of Kingsley Care Group." Valerie stepped up to the podium. She clicked a remote, and the screen came to life. "As you can see," she began, launching into a rehearsed speech about market volatility and the necessity of liquidation. She used words like synergy and streamlining. She spoke about the residents as units and the nursing homes as properties. I watched her. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was selling the destruction of my grandfather's life work as an act of mercy. "And regarding the shareholder distribution," Valerie said, clicking to the next slide, "we have structured the payouts to ensure maximum tax efficiency for the family trust." The slide showed a pie chart. There was a massive slice for Mark, a massive slice for Brandon, a significant management fee for Valerie. And there, in the corner of the slide, was a tiny sliver, a footnote. "Serenity Taylor, ex gratia payment, $300,000. It was not listed as a shareholder payout. It was listed under miscellaneous liabilities. I felt a burn in my stomach that had nothing to do with the bruise. They had not just cut me out. They had categorized me as a liability to be paid off. "Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "This looks acceptable in principle," he said, looking at his own copy of the documents. "However, we need to address the voting proxy. The founders' shares held by Mr. Walter Kingsley represent 51% of the voting power. Under the corporate bylaws, any sale exceeding $25 million requires the explicit approval of the founder or his designated proxy." He looked at Walter, who appeared to be dozing. "Since Mr. Kingsley is incapacitated," Henderson said delicately, "we need to know who holds the power of attorney for the Taylor Trust, which is listed as the holding entity for those shares." The room went silent. Valerie smiled. It was a tight, predatory smile. "That is a mere technicality. Mr. Henderson, the Taylor Trust is a vehicle my husband and I set up to manage Walter's assets. Mark and I are the de facto representatives." "Do you have the paperwork?" Henderson asked. "Compliance requires us to verify the trustee." "We can have it sent over later," Valerie said, waving her hand dismissively. "Let us not bog down the meeting with paperwork. We are all family here." "Actually," a rasping voice cut through the air. Everyone turned. Grandpa Walter had lifted his head. He was not dozing. He was looking directly at the Apex lawyer. "I would prefer we follow the rules," Walter said. His voice was weak, but it carried to the back of the room. He lifted a shaking hand and signaled to the woman standing quietly in the corner, Mrs. Higgins, the corporate secretary who had been with the company for 30 years. Mrs. Higgins, Walter said, please read the amendment to the Taylor Trust, filed and notarized yesterday afternoon. Valerie froze. Brandon looked at his mother, confused. Mark wiped sweat from his forehead. Mrs. Higgins stepped forward. She adjusted her glasses and opened a leather folder. Effective immediately, she read, her voice clear and professional. Mr. Walter Kingsley has transferred all voting rights, including the founder's special proxy, to the sole trustee of the Taylor Trust. She looked up over her glasses. The sole trustee is named as Ms. Serenity Taylor. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a car crash, before the screaming starts. Mr. Henderson frowned. He flipped through his papers. Serenity Taylor? Is she present? Valerie let out a high, nervous laugh. This is ridiculous. Serenity is my stepdaughter. She is not involved in the business. She is sitting in the back. She is just observing. She pointed at me without looking. She is not observing, Grandpa Walter said. He turned his wheelchair slightly. He looked past Brandon. He looked past Mark. He looked down the long expanse of mahogany, past the 12 men in suits, all the way to the corner where I was sitting. He pointed a shaking finger at the empty chair next to him, the chair Brandon was currently occupying. I do not understand why that chair is taken, Walter said. The person who sits next to me is the person who holds the vote. Brandon, get up. Brandon's face went bright red. Grandpa, what are you talking about? I am the VP. Get up, Walter snapped. The authority in his voice was sudden and shocking, a flash of the man who had built an empire from nothing. Brandon scrambled out of the chair, looking at his mother for help. Valerie was staring at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and terror. Serenity, Grandpa said. Come up here. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor echoed in the room. I picked up my notebook. I did not look at my father. I did not look at the investors. I kept my eyes on the empty leather chair at the head of the table. I began to walk. Every step felt heavy, as if I were walking through deep snow. I walked past the board members who had ignored me at Christmas parties for 20 years. I walked past the Apex lawyers who had not bothered to learn my name. I walked past Valerie, who was gripping the edge of the podium so hard her knuckles were white. I could feel their eyes on me. They were seeing the bruise now. They were seeing the dark purple mark on my face, standing out in stark contrast to the sterile boardroom. I reached the head of the table. Brandon was standing awkwardly to the side, holding his portfolio like a shield. I did not say excuse me. I simply waited. He stepped back, yielding the space. I sat down. The leather was cool. The view from this end of the table was different. I could see everyone. I could see the fear in Mark's eyes. I could see the calculation in Mr. Henderson's gaze. This is highly irregular, Valerie stammered. She forced a smile. Turning to the investors. Gentlemen, please understand. Serenity is young. She has no experience in corporate governance. She is very emotional. I am afraid my father-in-law has made a sentimental error in his old age. She looked at me, her eyes pleading and threatening at the same time. Serenity, darling, she said, her voice trembling. You know you are not equipped for this. This is a $30 million deal. People's livelihoods are at stake. Why do you not let Mark handle this? We can discuss your payment later. She was trying to undermine me. She was trying to paint me as a confused girl who had stumbled into a room of adults. I looked at Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson? I said. My voice was not loud, but it was steady. It was the voice I used when I negotiated the sale of Pulsebridge. Does the proxy document appear to be in order? Henderson looked at Mrs. Higgins, who nodded. It is notarized and filed with the state, sir. It appears to be legal, Henderson said, looking at me with new interest. Then the opinion of my stepmother regarding my experience is irrelevant, I said, as is her presentation. Now wait a minute, Mark spoke up, his voice cracking. You cannot just walk in here and hijack the meeting. Serenity, we have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders. I agree, I said, and as the majority voting bloc, I am exercising that duty. You are going to ruin us, Valerie shouted, abandoning her composure. You are going to tank the deal out of spite because I didn't invite you to dinner. This is a temper tantrum. She pointed at my face. Look at her. She has been in a fight. She is unstable. She is probably on drugs. The room murmured. The bruise. She was using the bruise she gave me as evidence of my instability. Arthur Penhaligon, my grandfather's personal attorney who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. He was a small man, but he commanded the room instantly. Mr. Henderson, Arthur said calmly, I would direct your attention to Article 7, Section 4 of the Kingsley Care Bylaws. Any transaction involving the sale of more than 50% of company assets requires the affirmative vote of the founder's proxy. Without said vote, any motion to sell is automatically void. He looked at Valerie over his spectacles. It does not matter if the trustee is young, Arthur said. It does not matter if she is emotional. It does not matter if she has a black eye. The only thing that matters is her signature. If she does not sign, there is no deal. The motion is dead on the floor. Arthur sat down. The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the projector fan. Valerie looked at the screen, where the $30 million figure was glowing. Then she looked at me. She realized, finally, that the game had changed. She could not bully her way out of this. She could not charm her way out of this. Serenity, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Please, think about the family. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had slapped me 3 hours ago. I looked at the woman who had put my grandfather in a room that smelled like bleach and told him to die quietly. I looked at the woman who had made me feel like a ghost in my own home. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table. I felt the vibration of the room. I am thinking about the family, I said. I turned to Grandpa Walter. He was looking at me, a fierce pride burning in his eyes. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. I looked back at the table, at the sea of expectant faces. I touched the bruise on my cheek. It throbbed, a sharp, hot reminder of the price of admission. My name is Serenity Taylor, I said. I represent the Taylor Trust, and we have some questions about this sale. I watched Valerie's face crumble. I watched Brandon look at the floor. I watched Mark sink into his chair. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting for permission to speak. I was the one holding the gavel, and I was about to bring it down. The room was so quiet that I could hear the hum of the projector cooling down. Mr. Henderson, the lawyer from Apex Capital, looked at me, then looked at the proxy document, and finally turned to the chairman of the board. If Ms. Taylor holds the voting rights, Henderson said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion, then procedure dictates she must be allowed to speak before the motion is carried. He gestured toward me. It was a small gesture, a simple wave of a hand, but it felt seismic. For 32 years, my presence in family gatherings had been tolerated at best and forbidden at worst. I had been the girl in the hallway, the girl in the basement, the girl at the kids' table. Now, 12 men in suits and the family that had rejected me were waiting for my voice. I did not stand up. I remained seated, my hands clasped on the mahogany table, grounding myself. Thank you, I said. My voice was calm, clearer than I expected. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Serenity Taylor. My father, Mark, introduced me earlier as someone with no experience. My stepmother, Valerie, described me as emotional and fragile. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the faces of the board members. I stopped on a man named Mr. Sterling, a logistics expert who had recently joined the board. However, I continued, some of you might know me by a different title. I am the founder and former CEO of Pulsebridge. Mr. Sterling's eyes widened. He sat up straighter. leaning forward. PulseBridge? The medical logistics platform? The one that handled the tri-state supply crisis last winter? That is correct, I said. I built that system from the ground up. I managed a team of 200 engineers. I negotiated contracts with federal agencies and global distributors, and I sold that company for $120 million 3 years ago. A ripple of shock went through the room. Mark's jaw dropped. He looked at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. Valerie went rigid, her face a mask of frozen porcelain. She had known I had money, but she had never understood the scale of my competence. I do not tell you this to brag, I said, keeping my tone leveled. I tell you this to clarify that when I look at Kingsley Care, I do not just see a balance sheet. I see a system, and right now, this system is failing not because the model is broken, but because the leadership has forgotten what it is building. I turned to look at Grandpa Walter. He was watching me with a fierce, burning pride. 50 years ago, Walter Kingsley started this company because a man named Mr. Miller died alone in a boarding house. I said, he built this company to ensure that the people society had thrown away would have a place to be seen. He built it for dignity. I picked up the thick acquisition proposal Apex Capital had provided and dropped it back onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. This proposal, I said, is an eviction notice. It sells the land our facilities sit on. It moves our residents into consolidated hubs to save on overhead. It treats our patients like inventory that has expired. If we sign this today, we walk away with $30 million. But we leave our integrity at the door, and I, for one, am not selling. This is a filibuster, Valerie interrupted. Her voice was shrill, cracking the professional atmosphere. She stood up, clutching the edge of the table. She is giving a sentimental speech to distract you from the financial reality. We have debt. We have operational costs. Apex has guaranteed they will keep the Kingsley name on the buildings. She looked wildly around the room, trying to make eye contact with the investors. I have taken care of Walter for 10 years, she shouted, pointing a manicured finger at my grandfather. I have fed him. I have managed his schedule. I am the only one who knows what is best for him. This girl shows up out of nowhere with a forged connection and tries to lecture us on family values. Valerie turned her eyes on me, and they were filled with a desperate, venomous hate. You do not know anything about love. Serenity, she hissed. You do not know anything about the sacrifices I have made to keep this family together. I looked at her. She was trembling. She was terrified. She was a cornered animal realizing that the cage door was open. I looked at Grandpa. He gave me a very small, almost imperceptible nod. You are right, Valerie, I said softly. We should talk about how you keep this family together. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I placed it in the center of the table, near the conference microphone. I tapped the screen. If we are discussing the character of the leadership team, I said to the board, I think you should see this. I pressed play. The video was crystal clear. The audio, amplified by the quiet acoustics of the boardroom, was devastating. Valerie's voice filled the room, sharp and cruel. You are a mousy little orphan with delusions of grandeur. You were always happiest in the dirt. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Mark closed his eyes. Brandon looked at the screen, his mouth slightly open. Then came the sound of the slap. It was a sharp, violent crack that made Mr. Henderson flinch. On the screen, Valerie's face was twisted in rage. She was gripping my arm, and then she shouted the words that would seal her fate. You think I will let a little girl like you ruin my son's future? I let the video play until the end, until the moment she collapsed onto the sofa in fear. Then I paused it. The silence in the boardroom was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a room where a mask had been ripped off, revealing the bone beneath. Valerie stood frozen. She was pale, her hands shaking violently at her sides. She looked at Mark, but my father was staring at the table, unable to lift his head. She looked at Brandon, but for the first time in his life, the golden boy was looking at his mother with something resembling horror. Valerie stammered, her voice a whisper. That was taken out of context. She provoked me. She attacked me first. We saw the timestamps. Mrs. Kingsley, Mr. Sterling said quietly, and we saw who threw the first punch. I stood up slowly. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I spoke to the board as if we were discussing a supply chain error. I am not showing you this to demand an arrest, I said. I am not showing you this to be petty. I am showing you this because this is the woman who wants to control the vote. This is the woman who claims to care about the vulnerable. I gestured to the screen, where Valerie's frozen, angry face was paused. She just assaulted a 32-year-old woman because she would not sign a piece of paper. I said, if she treats a family member like that when she thinks no one is looking. I want you to imagine how she treats a confused 80-year-old man in a wheelchair. I want you to imagine how she views the residents in our nursing homes. I looked directly at Mr. Henderson. Is this the management partner Apex Capital wants to be in business with? Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He closed his folder. Apex takes corporate governance and ethical standards very seriously, he said, his voice cool. This complicates matters. Mr. Sterling raised his hand. I move that we suspend the vote on the acquisition immediately, he said firmly, and I move that the board opens an internal review into the current leadership structure regarding conflicts of interest and ethical violations. Seconded, another board member said instantly. You cannot do this, Mark shouted. Finally finding his voice, he stood up, his face patchy and red. This is a family squabble. It has nothing to do with the business. Sit down, Mark, a rasping voice cut through the noise. Grandpa Walter gripped the arms of his wheelchair with a groan of effort that was painful to watch. He pushed himself up. He did not stand fully straight, but he stood. He looked at his son with a profound, heartbreaking disappointment. I have been quiet for too long, Walter said. I let you play CEO, Mark, because I thought you would grow into the suit, but you never did. You just let her tailor it for you. He pointed at Valerie, who was now weeping silently, not out of remorse, but out of the realization that her power had evaporated. I was wrong, Walter said. I was wrong to let the two of you hold the microphone. He turned to the lawyer, Arthur Penhaligon. Arthur, read the addendum to the will. Arthur stood up. Pursuant to the powers granted to the founder, Mr. Walter Kingsley is hereby exercising his right to remove the current executive recommendation. He is transferring the title of honorary chairman and the sole right to nominate the future CEO to Ms. Serenity Taylor. You cannot do that, Mark spluttered. The bylaws say... The bylaws were updated in 2010, Arthur interrupted, holding up a document. The founder retains absolute discretion over succession if the board finds a breach of ethical duty. I believe the video we just watched constitutes a significant breach. Valerie let out a sob and sank into her chair. She put her face in her hands. It was over. The $30 million was gone. The prestige was gone. The control was gone. Grandpa Walter looked at me. He reached out his hand. Serenity, he said. Take the chair. He did not mean the physical chair. He meant the weight of it. He meant the legacy. From this moment on, Walter said to the room, anyone who wants to stay at Kingsley Care answers to her. She is the only one who knows how to fix what you have broken. Mr. Henderson stood up. In light of these developments, Apex Capital is withdrawing its offer pending a full audit. We will be in touch. He signaled his team. The lawyers packed their briefcases and marched out of the room, leaving the smell of expensive cologne and failure in their wake. The board members began to murmur, discussing the motion to suspend. The vote was taken. It was unanimous. The sale was dead. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 8 years old. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I touched the bruise on my cheek. It hurt, but it was a good hurt. It was the pain of a wall breaking down. I looked across the table at Brandon. He was sitting alone now. Valerie was weeping. Mark was arguing with Arthur. Brandon was just staring at the blank screen where his future had just been canceled. I could have destroyed him. I could have fired him on the spot. I could have told him to get out of the building and never come back. That is what Valerie would have done. But I was not Valerie. "Brandon," I said. He looked up. His eyes were red. He looked like a little boy who had lost his mother in a supermarket. "I am not going to fire you," I said. He blinked. "What?" "But you are not vice president anymore," I said. "You do not know the business, Brandon. You only know the boardroom. If you want a future here, you have to earn it." I slid a notepad toward him. "I am offering you a 6-month internship," I said. "Field work. You will work in the Ohio facility. You will check inventory. You will deliver meals. You will sit with the residents and listen to their stories. You will learn what this company actually does." He stared at me. "You want me to work in a nursing home?" "I want you to know what you were trying to sell," I said. "Take it or leave it." He looked at his mother, who was too busy feeling sorry for herself to notice him. He looked at his father, who was defeated. Then he looked at me. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I will do it." It was a small victory, but it was a start. It was the beginning of a bridge. The meeting broke up. The board members came over to shake my hand, congratulating me, suddenly eager to be aligned with the new power. I accepted their handshakes, but I did not smile. I knew who they were. Finally, the room cleared. It was just me and Grandpa. He sat back in his wheelchair, looking exhausted but lighter, as if 20 years had been lifted off his shoulders. "We did it," he whispered. "We did it," I said. He reached out and took my arm. "Take me home. Serenity," he said. "Not to the hotel, to the penthouse. I want to sit on that balcony and watch the lights." "The car is waiting," I said. I helped him up. He leaned heavily on me, his arm hooked through mine. We walked toward the door. As we passed the head of the table, I glanced at the empty chair next to his, the chair that had been reserved for the golden boy, the chair that Mark and Valerie had guarded so jealously. "Grandpa," I said, "about the seating arrangements." He stopped. He looked at the empty chair. Then he looked at me. "Tonight," he said, his voice firm. "You come back to the penthouse and we eat dinner. You sit next to me. There is no special chair for Brandon anymore. There is no special chair for Mark. There is just the table. And the only people who get to sit there are the ones brave enough to walk through the door." He squeezed my arm. "You are not the girl in the basement anymore. Serenity. You are the one holding the keys." We walked out of the boardroom together. The hallway was bright. The light from the large windows at the end of the corridor spilled over the carpet, washing away the shadows. I did not look back at the mahogany table. I did not look back at the broken deal. I looked forward, at the open door, and at the winter sky beyond. It was cold in Chicago, but for the first time in 32 years, I was not shivering. I was home. Thank you so much for listening to Serenity's story until the very end. I am dying to know where you guys are tuning in from. Are you listening while driving in London, cooking dinner in Texas, or relaxing in a cafe in Hanoi? Please drop a comment below to let me know. And do not forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people who need to hear it.